Hey everybody, what's going on? Happy Sunday, happy time zone wherever you are. With me today is Ryan McDonald. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the website Tech Interview Guide, and Ryan was a teammate of mine back at SendGrid back in the day, like way, way back in the day. Gosh, I was there a decade ago, and I think you came on like 2013, 2014 kind of range.
2014, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So let's hear from you. How did you get into tech? We brought you on the team as a software developer back then, but give us some background on who's Ryan.
Definitely. Yeah, really excited to be here with you today. Thanks for having me. Um, so, like Ian mentioned, I'm Brian McDonald, and my degree is in adventure education. So, for any of you that don't have a traditional customer or traditional CS degree, that is how I got my start. I spent about 6 years leading expeditions for a bunch of different organizations, but mostly outward bound with a smattering of other private schools. And at some point, while the work was really fun, it was great. I was also living in a van and not really making any money. And I was like, what can I learn on my own using the internet? Because obviously, like, had a computer, like, could stop at any coffee shop I wanted, had some support there. What could I learn on my own? And what's going to like have a good return and be stimulating intellectually? And eventually landed on web design, into web development, into, and this whole thing just kind of turned into this like bad habit, like a progressively growing bad habit of like, where is more complexity? Like, where can I add more value? But all of this led to just like a series of internships and eventually software engineering, software development jobs. So yeah, I guess that's how I started into tech, and that was about I guess 12 years ago, 10 years ago now.
Mhm.
So I've been on it for a little while now, and that led me to work with Ian at SendGrid, which was a really fantastic experience working as a software engineer and
Yeah.
having a ton of great support. Finally, as someone who's self-taught, I think there was a lot of anxiety around getting into
Mhm.
software. Like, it's easy to be in a room and feel like you're just surrounded by giants, that you don't really know what's going on. But SendGrid was a really cool opportunity that like Ian and a bunch of other folks were willing to like kind of bring folks along. And I think recognized, or at least Ian, you can tell me, but I think recognized in folks like me that there was value to be had outside of just like engineering prowess, that there's value in having folks on teams that have had diverse life experiences, that show up and maybe ask questions that other people might not, but that oftentimes is a real big asset for the team. So anyway, being in tech has been a
Awesome.
total hoot. It's been a real journey, but
That's great. Just real quick before we go too far, so one of our users in chat, Sethi, has been coming by the channel now for a couple of months and applied some of the advice and got a job. So Sethi, congratulations! We're super stoked. Said in chat, I start a new job on Monday. They negotiated. They got a little bit more. They got almost 10% more on their negotiation. Currently in the office for 2 months and then hybrid work. That's fantastic. Sethi, I'm curious if you have to relocate for that job because you were hoping to stay local and not have to relocate. So I'm curious whether you're going to be relocating for that. Um, and then let's see. I want to show this real quick. So Ryan, I don't know if you're on Twitch, but I happen to have this in my photo archive for some reason.
oh
But
no.
these were little signs that we would hang up around SendGrid, just like, "Hey, you're like the hero of the month." It was kind of our version of employee of the month. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian and I were working on a project, a marketing product that allowed folks to segment their email lists and then use SendGrid's platform to send those messages. So at this point in time, I think I had transitioned from a software engineer into more of a process-centric role. So I was a Scrum Master or Scrum Leader at the time. And I think I got this because because I was still on call and I was helping like facilitate at least three or maybe even four. I can't remember how many different like fragments our team split into, but four different teams to help get this newly GA'd product sort of across the line. And yeah, those were some long days.
I remember having gosh, it was there were like 20 or 25 of us on the team, and then we kind of broke into like, okay, you're like the API team and you're the front end team and you're kind of the middleware glue team, and then like, yeah, and trying to keep all that stuff straight and trying to figure out like who's on which team and what are our responsibilities, and who reports to who and who's the team lead on this one this week, and like but so many great names, kind of come to mind when I think of like who was on that team. We had Travis, we had Ben, we had Craig, we had oh gosh, I see their names. So we had Andrew,
Andrew and
uh,
Mike. Yeah.
Mike. Yep. Who else was on that team? We had Corey on the team. I ended up working with Corey at Turing after that. We both started at Turing within a week of each other as instructors
Oh,
afterward.
nice.
Um, who else was there? We had the design team. We
Emily.
had Yeah, Emily was on the team. Well, we had two Andrews, right? We had Andrew that went to Seattle, and we had the other Andrew that played keyboard.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it was Andrew. It was
um,
Taggart, Andrew Taggart, and Andrew
yeah,
Hoyle.
that and then we had Mike McCrary,
McCrary.
um,
Yep. Yeah.
Crary, and then
And he
and he
was
stayed he stayed a
still
long
at.
time, right? I
It's
think I
only
think he just
recently that he left. Yeah.
Well, but not by his own choice, because Twilio did some
Ah.
layoffs, and I think he got caught up in that like a month or two ago. But yeah, a lot of really great folks. I remember the joke back in the day was, and honestly, it was not much of a joke, that to get hired at SendGrid, you had to be named David, Tim, Josh, or Ryan. I think those were like the four names, and like literally, you could say one of those names, and they're like, "Well, which one do you mean? Which Tim are you talking about? Which
Which Tim?
David are you
Yeah,
talking
exactly.
about? Which?" Um,
We
yeah, it
the
was like Tim,
Ryans had
Ryan,
their
David.
own. We had our own hip chat channel. It was like
Really,
Ryan's only. Yeah. Yeah, there were eight of us, I think, peak. It was
that's
pretty
awesome.
entertaining.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, it was pretty bizarre for sure. I think I was the only Ian for a while, and then we hired a second Ian, and that just confused things.
Oh
And
right.
then
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, Ian
but
and support.
yeah, yeah, a lot of good folks there. I still like deeply appreciate a lot of the folks that were on that team. Like everybody really hustled and put in a lot of effort, and so on. I know that as a team lead, like I was still learning things and I was still kind of growing into my role. And I know I wasn't the lead that I should have been in a lot of ways. I still had a lot of immaturity working out of my system, and things like that. I remember like coming into the office some days just full of rage and like ready to flip tables, just because of the commute or something. I mean, commuting around LA was awful, and then coming to Colorado was marginally better. But yeah, I just like I was not a good example of a lead dev some days, and I've actually reached out to several people on the team just to say like sorry for being a jerk. Like just I think of certain people on the team and some that I've actually tried reaching out to apologize, and they won't even connect with me
Oh,
on
that's
LinkedIn. Like
rough.
that's how bad it was.
Oh
And
man.
like I've tried my best to kind of make amends for it and say, you know what, I've grown and I've changed, and like this is where I'm at now. Just because I mean, as a white guy in tech, uh, we have a lot of dominance in the industry, but also just as personality wise, it's tough. It's tough to kind of deal with, and we have to take responsibility for that to some degree. But anyway,
Yeah. No, I mean that's a great point though, and that like I think it's easy like looking back on that time, right? Like
mm,
I guess I don't remember as much of that. And I think for me it's a good reminder that like everybody's on a journey. Like everybody is
for
learning
sure,
and like probably never showing up the way that they want to, but probably showing up the best that they can. And I think that
yeah,
that's like a good reminder, a good humbling
hmm,
reminder, I think, for a lot of us that like nobody's perfect. Everybody is showing up and faking it to some extent. And like
yeah,
it's all about, effort. It's about like showing up and like putting in the time as opposed to showing up in exactly the right way.
Right. My sister actually posted something on Facebook the other day, and it was like, um, we have to remember that as adults, like kids are allowed to, how is it worded? Now I want to try and find it just so I don't like mess up the quote. Um, some of y'all seem to forget that children are just small people trying to figure out the world. They're allowed to have breakdowns. They're allowed to not like things, allowed to have a hard time. Stop expecting children to handle their emotions when y'all can't handle yourselves. And I followed up on that, and I'm like, some people forget that adults are often trying to figure out the world. We're allowed to have breakdowns and timeouts and not like things. And, it's like,
Totally.
adults are still just trying to figure this stuff out too. At the same time, though, like we can't use that as an excuse for bad behavior and things like that, especially when you're in a professional level job. But um, was I on your interview team when you interviewed at SendGrid? Do you remember?
It was Ben. I can't remember who else interviewed me. I think it was like Ben, and it was like it might have been some like really high leadership type person, like some
Hmm,
like C-level person. And then I don't think you actually interviewed me.
that's too bad.
I know, missed opportunity.
Missed
Um,
opportunity for sure. Yeah,
no,
no,
I
I
think
had
that
I had a lot of fun putting those interview processes together. So my interview process actually started when I was in Anaheim. I was leading up kind of the web development side of things, and basically my first day in the office, my VP of engineering gave me a stack of resumes. He's like, "Here, hire a team." I'm like, "What?" And so we worked out like what was our process going to be, and it was a phone call with like a brain teaser of like, you have a bucket that holds 3 gallons of water and a bucket that holds 5 gallons of water, and you need to measure out 4 gallons of water. Like, how do you do that? And then if you figured out the answer to that, it's like, all right, cool. Your take home assignment is to go build us a web app where you have forms that you can input those values, and you tell us the steps it would take to actually measure out that amount of water. But the catch was the form had to allow for any values, and then you had to tell us whether it was possible, and if possible, what were the steps. And so it was a little bit of logic and a little bit of web development, but it was mostly on
yeah,
the logic side of things of like, how do you figure out like, how do I fill up a bucket, pour it into the other bucket until you match some target? And I thought it was a lot of fun, like from a logic point of view. And it was very basic, form input, like super super basic on the HTML side of it. But when I interviewed David Tomberlin, I actually changed it up, and I'm like, all right, Metallica wants to do a jam session with Led Zeppelin. So who do they know that knows somebody that knows Led Zeppelin, kind of thing, like
ooh,
six degrees of
graph.
separation kind of thing.
Yeah,
And so I basically changed it up where I said, give me a list of names, give me a list of names, and just build your own graph and then figure out how many steps it would take to go from one to the other. But do that as a web development project where you've got like drop downs of names and you pick those and you just tell me like the steps it would take. So find some way of visualizing what the graph would look like and then visualize like how many steps it would take, and he absolutely crushed that. I mean, like everything that Tomberlin ever did, like he
that's
absolutely like
unsurprising
went
given the
above
nature of
and beyond.
Tomberlin.
And but he like set the bar so high that like anybody else that applied using that interview question later, they're like, but that wasn't as good as Tomberlin. So are they really going to be a good developer?
Ruined,
Um,
ruined it for
but
everyone else.
yeah, good job, David. But no, I look back on like so many good people on that team. Like we had Kyle and David kind of as a pair, and those two worked really well together. They didn't know each other until they got to SendGrid, but they gelled so well and worked so well together. And then like you and Emily working together, like the two of you, like you both came in pretty early stage career and just kind of found that bond of like, I'm new, what do we do, like let's work together. And then getting Taggart on the team, and like the three of you were like inseparable working on stuff, and like just to see the output and the drive and the motivation that y'all had, it was really great to watch. And so I,
Yeah,
I had I had a lot of fun being the lead. Like once I got to that point where I'd settled in on building out a bunch of these teams, I'm like, all right, we got some good people on the team. And then the whole like, do we work in Boulder? Do we work in Denver? The answer is yes. Like, you know,
Yeah.
going back and forth between the offices. Now, so I left and you stayed. Um, and I remember one of the things that happened is I had to peel this giant sheet of stickers off my laptop, and someone like stuck it on the wall as an homage to Ian or something. And I had to like stare at that for like the week, as I'm like leaving the office. I'm like, why is that on the wall?
Yup. Yeah.
Um,
One of those
but
dividers in our sweet open office.
yeah, but you were there. Were you there when they started like when they bought the shuttle bus and they were like driving everybody down to the Denver office? Like, what was that like?
I was, yeah. So this was a handful of years ago before COVID, obviously. And we had a location in Denver, we had a location in Boulder, and they had decided, I think I think it was, I feel like it was in the process of like efficiencies for IPO that they had decided that they just were going to consolidate
Yeah,
offices. But the sort of olive branch that they offered to everyone who worked in Boulder is that they would have a shuttle bus, a Wi-Fi shuttle bus, show up in front of the old office at, I think it was like 8:30 every day, and then it would leave the office in Denver to come back, so that you would be outside of the office at 5 o'clock every day. And the idea was that you would just like that this commute basically didn't exist. It just like became part of your workday, which on paper sounded really cool. And you're like, oh, this is interesting because at the
I
time
could
in
work
San
on the bus.
Francisco,
Yeah.
yeah, I could work on the bus. Like in San Francisco, like Facebook and all these other huge companies were doing stuff
Mm.
like this. So it was one of those like, ooh, like Boulder,
We've
Denver is like
really made
turning
it as
into
a
this.
company.
We've
Yeah,
done
yeah.
it, yeah, yeah. And like as a region, like we're gonna be
Right,
real. We're the first, a vanguard of Wi-Fi
right.
buses. I'm sure that will be happening here.
I
And
remember seeing that go down the freeway a couple times. I'm like, oh, there's that SendGrid bus going by.
the reality of it was a little bit less good in that some of the suspension on those buses was not great. So you would be like, you'd sort of like have your laptop and you'd be like know when the bump is coming and like take your hands off so you didn't like keyboard smash like on whatever you were working on
Uh,
and then like go back and like so
I pity anybody on a video call getting vertigo of like a shaky camera and like.
yeah, you just turn the video off. Otherwise people would
Uh,
yell at you because you'd suck up all the bandwidth. No, it was funny.
uh,
It's definitely funny now because it's like I haven't worked an
mhm.
in-person job for 3 jobs. Like I don't even really remember what office life is like, which some
Yeah.
days is good and some days is bad. But
Yeah. So you got into kind of the agile scrum master kind of thing while you were still at SendGrid, and then from that it transitioned into like another role at another company, or did you transition again before you left SendGrid? Like what was the rest of that journey?
yeah, so at SendGrid I transitioned. I had a surprise child, and my surprise child did not sleep. So
As children
I
do.
was a yeah, yeah, yeah. But it was like a year and a half of that, and I realized that I couldn't continue my rate of like continuing to be interested in like new tech and be like basically researching at night. Taking notes during the day, trying to like take that home at night or on weekends and like research stuff. And when you have a kid who doesn't sleep, that doesn't work. Like the whole model just like fell apart for me. So I felt like I was falling behind, and it was really
Yeah.
really stressful.
Mm.
So I tried to figure out what other roles, like what else could I do to help and add value to the team. And for me, the Scrum Master role seemed pretty ideal. We were in the process of trying to release our product, and this is after you left, Ian. So of
Mm.
course, everything was technologically fantastic until you left. But then after you left, it all wheels fell off.
I don't believe that for a moment, but thank you.
Kidding, kidding. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things. We were trying to launch a really complex product, and we ended up with incidents almost weekly at times, and sometimes more than weekly. So it was just like a series of like trying to release the last couple features and sort of the cleanup to make this thing really hardened in GA, and like managing and handling all of these incidents. So for me, between the like engineering process side of things, which was pretty fascinating, and then the fact that incidents, for me having a background in like search and rescue and EMS and all of that stuff, like the idea of an emergency in software was kind of this like happy place for me. I was like, oh, like I understand what's required here. Like we need to like maintain a level of focus, but not freak out, and like drive towards some particular outcome, right? And in the medical space, it's like you're trying to package someone up and get them to the hospital, right? But like in our space, it's like we're trying to mitigate like the impact to our customers, whatever it is that looks like, and that really resonated with me. And it planted the seed. So I didn't move immediately from this sort of Scrum Master role at SendGrid to this other role, to this incident command role that I eventually moved into. But it definitely primed me. It basically felt like a training course for how to be an incident commander, for how
Hmm.
to hop into a situation where there's like even maybe like nebulous understanding of problems, and how to help teams and groups drive towards resolution, and then how to think about those types of problems inside of organizations more broadly. So basically a series of job hops, doing engineering process work into helping found the incident command group at Twilio. So
Hmm. Okay.
funny, like kind of funny story for folks that are familiar with the kind of saga of some of these companies. Is SendGrid is a company that Ian and I worked for, and it was acquired by Twilio. I left before that acquisition, and then I actually joined Twilio again. So I was like sort of this like
Oh, you
interesting
went back.
boomerang. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I spent a decent amount of time at Twilio as an incident commander, helping them figure out what that role and what that program looks like at a really large organization.
Interesting. Yeah,
Um,
I'd forgotten that you went back later on. I thought that you kind of stayed. I didn't realize you left and went back. I thought you were just there the whole time.
no, yeah, I did like a 3.5 year stint there the first time, and then came back and did like a year and some change. So
Yeah, would have been nice to have hung onto the options if they had kept those going. But
yeah.
yeah, I left. I left well before the acquisition, and it honestly surprised me because one of the earliest events I remember going to with Elmer Thomas was I was in San Francisco for like a Google I/O conference or something. I want to say this was like 2012, and Elmer's like, "Well, I've got this thing to go to, and could you bring a box of swag up to San Francisco?" Because I was driving from LA to San Francisco because I love a road trip. And I'm like, yeah, I'll bring up a box of swag, no problem. And so I took a giant box of like t-shirts and stickers and whatever. And I show up at this meetup that he's doing with this giant box of swag. And he was doing a meetup with Twilio at the time. And I remember thinking like, oh, SendGrid should totally buy Twilio. Like they're this tiny little startup, and then like it just it really blossomed from a partnership point of view. Like SendGrid and Twilio were like often doing events together, and I remember just going to that kind of thing and watching Elmer working and thinking like, wow, you can do this as a job. Like you can just go around and do meetups and conferences and give technical talks and like build content. Like that's a job. That's pretty cool. And I think that's what really got me interested in eventually getting into developer relations myself and developer advocacy. Was just seeing the team at SendGrid, like being able to travel and do this kind of stuff, but also watching them burn out from it too. Um, if you remember Eddie, do you remember Eddie? He lives Eddie
I don't think
Zaneski,
so.
really really tall guy. He lives down in Lakewood now, so he's not too far from me. But I remember talking to him one time. He was flying back through Denver, and he's like, "Oh, I'm really excited. I get to go back to New York and I get to go home." And I'm like, "Why is that a big deal?" And he's like, "I haven't been home in like a month." He was literally like living out of a suitcase for like 5 weeks straight. I'm like, "You're paying rent for a place in New York City and you're not even
And you're
there?
not
Like,
there. Oh my
why
gosh.
would you do that?" Um, so yeah, like it was really easy for them to burn out because I mean, Sengrid was literally sending people around the world to like events all the time. And I remember thinking like, if I get into like a DevRel type of role, like that would be really fun, really awesome, but not that much travel. Like that's way too much. And so that was one of the things. Like once I started getting into DevRel, I'm like, I'm willing to travel within reason. You know, like I don't want to burn out on the travel side of things, and I want to make sure I'm around for family and stuff like that. So um, Postman's been really great about that. They're like, travel as much as you want to. If you don't want to travel and you want to do like remote conferences, that's fine. Since there are remote conferences, um, it'll be interesting to see how much of that changes in 2023 with things being remote or less remote. You know,
Yeah, a little more open these days. I
yeah.
guess that's an interesting question. At SendGrid, do you remember where DevRel reported into? Did they report into marketing?
I want to say it was marketing at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be a little tricky sometimes where DevRel actually reports. Some report to product, some report to marketing, some are under engineering, some have groups in all three. Some are more like customer support oriented. Really depends on the goal of what the DevRel team's trying to do. Like, are you trying to build awareness of the product? Then you should be on the product team. If you're trying to, or maybe marketing, or
Marketing, right.
like when I was at Stream, for example, we were small enough that we, DevRel just answered straight to the CEO. But once they started growing, I think they reported to marketing and product, which were both under the same kind of VP uh,
Hmm.
type of role, because they were still raising awareness of who they were and what they did, and so on. But I think it's a little bit different for every company as far as what that responsibility is. And at Postman, for example, we have several kind of DevRel teams. Like, we've got the group that I'm on, which reports to product. We have another team that works with student advocacy. So they work with a lot of students about, here's what APIs are and how to build APIs, and let's get you using Postman so that when you're out in the workplace, you're going to continue to use that tool. And then we've got kind of like an architect, like a success architect or solutions architect type of role, and
Hmm.
they're effectively DevRel, but a lot more on the engineering side of, like, let's actually dig in and see what's going on with your API and like how to make it better and things like that. So it really
Interesting.
depends on the focus and like what the company's trying to really get involved in with when it comes to DevRel.
Does that student led or does the student centric group, does that group reporting to marketing? Because like that feels like a pretty like blatant in a good way, sort of like
Yeah.
awareness play, right? Of like,
I, yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure if it's marketing or if it's also part of the like eventual sort of drip down from the product side. I'm not sure.
gotcha. I think another so to finish my story here, like from a bit ago, and I guess to tie a line here between what you were just talking about with DevRel is I spent time as an incident commander, and I spent time like deeply evaluating the tooling space around incident management and automated incident management, or just sort of automated tooling in general. A lot of those chatbots. And I landed on this company, Fire Hydrant, which is where I work now. And I ended up joining Fire Hydrant in more of a solutions architect, like customer success engineer type role to help folks with implementations. But there was a realization at the org that the experience that I had as an incident commander and in managing and helping run programs at large scale was really helpful, not just for customers, but it was really interesting to prospects. And it was really interesting to sort of this broader group.
Mm.
So my journey towards to DevRel, and I'm a responder. I created my own title, so I'm a responder advocate. Which
Nice.
fun thing when you're at a small company in an emerging space is like you make stuff up. But I think that people with time in seat, being able to like serve as a lightning rod or sort of like a trusted advisor, I think, in a lot of interactions can be hugely valuable for companies. And like, I don't think I really like put my finger on the fact that like some of the authenticity that I brought as a scrum master and then now as an advocate are because like I spent enough time in the seat actually managing incidents, actually writing software to be able to come in and like speak to those groups of people that do that for a living and have
Gotcha.
it feel really authentic. And I guess I'm curious, like for you, like I know your extensive background probably has made a lot of this stuff with Postman just like a slam dunk in terms of your technical competence and authenticity.
Um, yes and no. I think most of it is from the background of like, oh yeah, I've been doing this. I've been in the industry for a while, and so you kind of lean on that. Um I guess maturity of like having been in tech, having seen the progression of APIs, where like we joked all the time at SendGrid. It's like, well, we made this API, it's kind of REST, but it's not really REST. And I remember going to meetups and trying to explain like what SendGrid was, and I went to a couple of conferences and gave talks too because I was sort of pretending I was DevRel. Um, I think that was kind of the foray into like watching the DevRel team and like, oh, I want to do that too. I want to go to a conference and give a talk. And everyone was like, yeah, go to a conference and give a talk as an engineer. Like that's great. Um, and just talking about how like, oh yeah, I call our API, like I was basically talking about APID and talk about how like, oh, it's not really restful, so it's kind of our insomniac API because it's not restful, trying to make all these cheesy jokes and watching those jokes like completely bomb on stage. But being able to just see the progression of, okay, well, this is what we started with, and this is why we put an API in front of our database, and it allowed for a lot more scalability behind the scenes. Our applications then didn't need to care what kind of database you were talking to or how to communicate with that database, whether it was SQL or no SQL. Like nothing needed to care. Nothing needed to really, you know, look at which ORM do we use? Are we using Rails? Are we using Python? Like, what language are we using, and what's the right ORM we should be using? It's like we don't care. Everything's an API now, and just being able to speak to that experience a lot, and then getting into the architecture side of things because I was, I mean, technically my title was web architect, like senior web architect. So like
Hmm.
Jose and I were like technically the architects of a lot of things when it came to the API and the web design and the web development side of things and how that all progressed at SendGrid and making decisions about like when is it time to go from a monolith to like just backend APIs with the front end, kind of expanding out into uh, you know, like more of those separations. So I think that's more where that knowledge came into play is as far as like just how do we make those decisions? When is it time to do that? When is it time to scale things or re-architect things for scale? I think that's more where that came into play with Postman is now when I get up and give a talk, it's like, okay, I'm not just like DevRel at Postman trying to shill like, yeah, everybody should use Postman. It's a great product. And it is a great product. But like getting up and being able to say like, hey, with authority, I've been around the API space for a while. These are lessons that I've learned and how we scaled things out and why we designed them the way that we did and so on. And having someone, get up on stage and say, I come from a background of developing these APIs, learning lessons along the way, making things better, learning how to scale. Kind of like we were saying at the beginning of the session, like, adults are trying to figure things out too. Like we're trying to figure out things all the time as technologists. We build a thing and then we kind of go back and reevaluate and go, was that a good way of doing it? Should we have done it differently? So that makes a big difference. I think more to speak, I guess, on that side of things. But
It's interesting thinking back on some of the architecture at SendGrid and how some of that um, seemed to be front running a lot of this idea of platform engineering that we're seeing in a lot
Mhm.
of orgs. And like now platforming engineering is in vogue, whereas like I felt like we had those types of problems, right? Of needing to abstract away data and like make it accessible to multiple products and for multiple different constituent groups. So thinking back on, for example, like APID, it's interesting to think about how you all had to tackle some of those things, sort of in the absence of a lot of,
Yeah.
I would say, maybe guidance from the industry.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of that is like Tim Jenkins was really the architect behind that one. Like he kind of had this vision like way before anything else of like let's build this API layer in front of a database and I remember the initial pushback of like why do that? You're just adding complexity, but after like a year or two of building that out and say no, all of our apps are going to go through this API and everybody kind of complaining about it and then realizing like oh, that was actually a really smart thing to do. And now I talk about that all the time. Like I talk to like when I was a teacher, telling students like, hey, like building an API in front of your database can actually make sense. Like, yeah, you've got to try to build all these new like RESTful or REST-ish kind of endpoints to go talk to your database, but think about what it alleviates. Like you don't need to worry about your ORM anymore. Everything's just an API endpoint of like, go fetch this data, go fetch that data, and it can figure out where do I grab all this different kinds of data. How do I sort of put all that back together into some semblance of data payload and give back what you're looking for. it really allowed for a lot of scalability that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So
And it seemed like introspection as well. Like I think that something that was interesting to me is as the concerns grew beyond like a single product needing to access that sort of wrapped data store, like it became obvious where load was coming from, right? And like we
mm,
had this like kind of almost observability, this internal observability layer
right,
to how our data is being used and like where it was going, and just some of the conversations that I think that we were able to have were felt inspired. I guess like thinking
yeah,
back now, um, yeah, it's I think it's pretty cool to see how some of these internal services now, like APID, have just basically become like internal products. You know, the idea of APID having a product manager, I think at the time people might have scoffed at, but now it's like
right.
that would be totally
It makes
commonplace.
sense.
Like
Yeah,
you would
absolutely,
expect someone to be like thinking through all of the concerns. So
for sure. So getting into this idea of like incidents response and now you're working at Fire Hydrant, you said it's called.
yeah,
Um,
firehydrant.com.
okay. Um, and then you did management for a while, right? You were in a management kind of role for a bit,
I was a team lead on the
or team
incident
lead.
command group. So I was
Okay.
I was like I was pretty deeply involved in all of the hiring that was going on
Hmm.
as we built that team out.
Okay. What was your interview process like for something like that? Because I mean that kind of thing is very different from being like a straight 100% like software engineer kind of role. What kinds of practices would you put in place? Like what would sort of stand out as a candidate for something like that kind of role?
Yeah, I think we had an interesting challenge in that the work that we were doing required technical understanding, but not technical depth necessarily. You had to
Hmm.
understand how software worked, right? But we didn't need to test someone if they could implement bubble sort or something, right? There's not a lot
Okay.
of value in someone being able to like go in and directly write code, but they needed to be able to interface seamlessly with a lot of folks who did. So in a lot of ways, our ideal candidate looked like a someone in EMS who then went through a coding boot camp. Someone who could communicate well, had good human skills, was able to interface across a bunch of different groups and crisis situations, but then also had like that nice like smear of like technical competence on top,
Hmm.
and had like spent at least a little bit of time like playing with code and
Okay.
being in the tech culture. So some things that we obviously could like screen for some of those things, like trying to find folks that had that practical experience managing crises outside of that. There also, I think, was like a subset of project managers that could be really good at that, that like excelled in high pressure situations.
Hmm.
Um, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of it came down to folks' ability to tell stories, right? Because what we're doing while we're managing an incident is we're telling a story. And the way that that person can express their experiences and describe other crisis situations and what they learned from those things, for us was the biggest signal, aside from just sort of like what are your sort of base characteristics, right?
Right.
Um, so it really was like, tell us about a time when you had something go totally sideways, and like, what did you do and how did you think about it and
Hmm.
what did you learn? And I think those three sort of questions gave us a pretty good lens into if someone was going to be able to be effective in that incident command role.
Interesting. And then from a company point of view, like how do you keep people um sort of in the right mind space of like there's a problem going on, everybody panic, versus like, hey, everybody stay calm, everybody like, we got to have level heads about this or we're not going to fix it the right way without slowing down the process. Like that's a big thing with incident response of like, okay, it's important that we fix this, but it's also important that we do it the right way. It's important that that we're sort of level headed about it and doing things properly and still following like company policies and things like that. But is that kind of the primary business that Fire Hydrant is in? Is like helping other companies manage their own incidents or mitigate the incidents? Like, what does fire hydrant actually do, and how do you like I say, kind of keep you know keep a level head, I guess, with people.
Yeah, I think I'll speak to my incident command experience first because I think that it translates nicely into what you would hope that a tool would do. But the goal of having an incident commander and high severity incidents at Twilio was so that when somebody, randomly got woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and got pulled in, and we said, "Hey, your service is down," that they had really clear expectations of what their job was and what next steps were and what communication looked like, and sort of just like in an uncertain situation, providing as much structure as possible and giving people places to plug in. And that was my
Okay.
job, was to
Mm.
be like, okay, like I'm kind of the hub of this thing. I'm not an expert in any of it, but I am an expert in the process. So you don't have to think
Okay.
about any of the process when I'm an incident commander. I'm going to ask you for inputs. You're going to give me some outputs, just like a good API interface, right? And we're going to chug along because we have these like great shared expectations of what it is for you to show up and be in an incident. And I would say that fire hydrant, which is where I'm working now, and honestly the tool that I wished that we'd had even back at like SendGrid when I was managing incidents, basically automates away as much of those sort of like standard boilerplate interactions that you would expect to have when you're in an incident. So for example, you get paged, right? You show up, and the first thing that you have to do is you probably need to write up a description of what you're seeing and how that relates to the customer, even just in a very like hand wavy and cursory way, right? And fire hydrant can't do that for you, but it does give you those prompts right away because we've all been in the situation where you get paged, you get pulled in, and you're like, oh, maybe I could fix this like immediately, right? Like maybe this is not an incident anymore because I could just roll back this deploy, right? And while that's a great instinct, like it's empathizing with the customer and all of that, it's not following the process. So if you're 15 minutes into this like 5-minute fix and Ian shows up and he says, "Ryan, what are you doing? Like nobody knows what's going on. This everything is on fire. Shit's down here." Like I'm so close, right? I think giving people those reminders of like, hey, even if this isn't a big deal, even if you think you can fix it right away, we still need to follow some basic process so that the rest of the organization knows what's going on, so that our customers, have a status page update as soon as they possibly can.
Right.
Because what we're seeing is like if you're in a crisis situation and you don't follow process, you don't have expectations set well, the like CTO shows up, right? And he's like, "That's it, I'm taking over. I got it, right?" And they also don't have any idea what the expectations are. So it's like you take this small mess and you turn it into a bigger mess, right? Because
Mm.
nobody is like operating in a way that's predictable or expected in this crisis situation. So our
Right.
tool basically abstracts away a lot of that stuff, right? We give you contextual reminders. We say, hey, when specific services are added, maybe like send particular messages to another channel, a downstream dependent service, right? We help with communications. We have a status page as well. So really, it's just like any of the parts of incident management that you think of as toil or automatable. We help you with all of those things.
Cool.
That was a long answer, but
No, no, it's good. It's good. No, it answered a lot of what I was going to actually ask as follow up to. Um, yeah, I think like the notion of it is actually really interesting to think of. Like, how do we help companies with this sort of thing? How do we help you kind of, like I say, like keep a level head on like, oh no, everything's going down the drain. It's like, no, no, like that's what we're here to like sort of help out with and help you mitigate and get through. And um, but yeah, it's interesting to think about kind of the interview experience for something like that, where you're sort of testing someone's ability to handle high stress interaction and still sort of maintain their own level head. Because if you're not level headed, how are you going to keep them level headed? But like you say, kind of be able to tell the story of like, this is what happened. This is like, we'll get into the why later, but like, this is what's going on. This is how we're going to fix it. Um, it's definitely an interesting kind of thing to think about. Like different sort of sets of skills, like you say, like good overlaps of different types of things to try to interview for.
Yeah, and I think that one other large characteristic that we were looking for in folks was humility because like I mentioned and you've mentioned, like these are unknown incidents, right? Like there's so much that's like hard to understand and you could maybe have what you feel like is the best idea or intentions, right? And drive it forward and realize it was totally wrong. It was a red herring. So for us, it's less about like um being right all the time and more about being willing to quickly say we are not right now, we need to like we need to go back, right? So having no ego, and just sort of like being relentlessly focused on solving the problem and not on like how am how right am I, you know, or like how expert am I, right? Because at the end of the day, um, it's all about just like holding this container for this like really
Right.
fast paced problem.
Yeah. And is it really about being right, or is it really about working with the team on like how do we make it right? How do we sort of fix this whole thing as opposed to just like I'm right and you're wrong. Like when incidents comes up, a lot of people's first instinct is like point fingers, make blame and whatever. But we kind of had a rule at SendGrid of like, look, it's yes, it got caused by somebody, but like let's figure that out later. Like you know, let's figure out how we're going to fix it. What's that path forward going to look like? And then we'll do like a retrospective on what happened and why. And, drilling into what did we call it? The five whys of like, why did that happen? Okay, why did that happen? Why did that happen? And really getting down to the root cause of like, okay, like someone was in a hurry, wanted to push some code on a Friday afternoon and, causes big outage over the weekends. Like, okay, well, why did all that happen? Like, why did that person feel rushed to push out that code on a Friday afternoon? Like, what was the cause of that? Was it managerial and why was that? Like, why did they feel that something had to be pushed on a Friday afternoon? And just really digging into like, okay, now what did we learn from all of that? Not necessarily point fingers and say, okay, well, Ian as the team lead told Ryan to do blah blah blah, and so was it Ryan's fault? Was it Ian's fault? Like who cares whose fault it was? It needs to get fixed. Let's just fix the thing and figure out afterwards like what are we going to learn from this and what are we not going to do next time. And I think that's what
Totally.
I appreciate the most about Agile. And a lot of people like to kind of crap on Agile, but one of the biggest things with Agile is like, what do we want to change for next time? Like, let's just try something different. Whether that's how we run our sprint or how we do a retro or how we do, our planning. Like, let's just find something to change. Like, is something somewhere going to make us more efficient, make us better at something? Maybe not. But the only way we're going to know is if we experiment and try something a little different. And I think a lot of people don't get that about Agile is that it's meant to be a hey, turn the knobs, see what happens, see what's going to make you better as a team. Maybe nothing will make it better, but like I say, you're not going to know that unless you try making something a little different. But I also remember at SendGrid like trying to change so many things all the time that everyone kind of rebelled against change for the longest time. It's like, oh, we're changing our process again just for the sake of changing our process. It's like, yes and no. I mean, I think that was one of the biggest things I said when I was leaving is like, be adaptable to change. Like, change is going to happen. Like, I remember sending an email out to the team in my goodbye saying, like, be willing to evolve, like as a human, as a technologist. Like, things are going to change. We need to adapt and just be fluid and just roll with it. Because if you don't like it, it's going to change again in 6 months anyway. So, like, what difference does it make?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that from SendGrid, like one of the lessons I got there is it's less about what process you're using, what tech stack you're on, like what product you're working on, even, and more about who you're working around, right? And if you develop strong bonds with your team, like it makes the ability to kind of roll with those punches of
Yeah.
changing what methodology, what team structure looks like, right? Who owns
Mhm.
what? All of that is so much easier when you're with a group of people that you know and trust. But
And even
I
and
did
even
want
just
to,
changing around those smaller teams that we had too of like, what, I want to work on front end for a little while. It's like, all right, well, let's rotate you out and we'll rotate it some other person in, and like having management and team leads paying attention to like, hey, so and so really would like to work on the API a little bit. Like, is there an opportunity for like an exchange kind of program of like, can we move Ryan onto the API team because Ian wants to work on the front end for a minute? Like, can we make that happen for a little while? And,
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many good threads here too.
Mhm.
To go back to Agile, I think like what you touched on is both its biggest strength and what it does maybe the worst job commercially marketing about is the idea that like you should be changing in relation to the context that you're in, right? Like you should like understand what your space is, read the room, and then change according to those things, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to thou must do Scrum, or thou must do Safe, right?
Mhm.
For me, the whole thing has been this like awesome agile. The whole idea of agile has been like pushing as many of the decisions as far down towards the people doing the work as possible.
Yeah,
And I think that
for sure.
when that goes well, you get situations like at SendGrid, which I think was like a very healthy agile culture. When you get sort of like agile as dogma, whatever form that takes, like then like I think there's good reason for a lot of folks to like push back against it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like if the process isn't serving you or your customers at the end of the day, like change it. Like, and I think that's pretty rad.
One thing, just to kind of bring this back to the idea of like interview prep and so on. A lot of people coming out of coding boot camps and schools, they kind of learn like sort of the idea of like lowercase a agile, of like working a 2 week sprint kind of thing. But really, it's like you've got 2 weeks to build a project. So are like is it really sprint
Right.
planning, or are you just planning your project?
Right.
But what kinds of things would you recommend for somebody, coming from a background like yourself where you went through, boot camp and whatever and got into tech? Is it worth learning agile? Is it worth learning those kinds of skills? Like what would you sort of recommend people sort of dig into? Is that something that would make someone stand out in a job interview these days, or not?
I feel like understanding the intent of agile is probably enough because then wherever
Mm,
you show up, right? I think if you and a good way to do this might be to look at like some of the like what are those called? Basically the Agile Manifesto. I think is probably
mm,
what I would recommend is like reading through that and getting a sense for it. And if that resonates with you, like figuring out how you can speak to that in the interview process in relation to how folks are running things. I think even as a more junior person asking like, hey, what is your team structure? How are you actually like running sprints? How are you doing the engineering process behind your team? I think will, in my opinion, at least earn points because I think that that's it's a pretty good litmus test for culture,
mm,
right? If they say like, well, we're hardcore safe, like we just only do safe, like that probably tells you something about the maybe bureaucratic leaning nature of the organization that
mm.
you're looking at. Whereas if they say like, we do nothing. We're cowboy coding. We deploy, straight to prod. Like I just modified something on prod the other day. Like that's
Yikes.
also some pretty interesting signal, right? And I think that between those two, you can use process to sort of like push into that space of like, how do
Mm.
you work, right? And
But
I think
process for the sake
being
of process is not a good thing either. But
totally,
yeah, that's
totally.
that's a
But I
whole
think
other
that
thread we can get into.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That I feel like I spent a lot of my agile life fighting against the folks that were sort of just like pure process, more process
Mm.
is better process kind of thing. But
But from an
um,
interview perspective, like learning Agile Manifesto, so I dropped that link in chat if anybody wants to go read up on it. They're like,
oh,
what is it,
perfect.
12 tenets of Agile or
I think
something.
it's only
It
four.
was it only four now?
Yeah, it's
Um,
pretty light, which is cool.
I remember back in the day there were like a lot of different things like this over that and this over that. Um,
Well,
but like I said, I agree with you. Like just understanding the intent behind it, not holding to it so tightly that it becomes dogma, but like understanding like what is agile, what is Kanban, what is safe. Like I've actually never heard of safe, but like there are a lot of different ways of how our team can actually get work done. And I agree with the whole like push it down to the people that are actually going to implement it. Like let the upper management side of it determine what to do, but let the people implementing it determine the how. Like, let me figure out how I want to implement that. You tell me what you want, I'll figure out how to make that happen. But like, you shouldn't be dictating to me how to make something work. Um,
definitely.
yeah.
And I think that So you can drive some of that not only by asking, like what flavor or brand of Agile are you doing if they're espousing that they use Agile, but more so like tell me about a time that the team adapted to like a changing situation, adapted to like new
Right.
context, right? And I think those can be really
Mm.
good questions for hiring managers because if they're on their heels and they're like, like, oh, well, we just use safe. We just keep doing whatever safe tells us to do, right? Like uh, that for me would be a smell. That
Yeah.
would be like, oh, interesting. Like you're probably not that adaptable. You're probably not meeting your customers where they're at.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, I know at SendGrid, for example, we had our 4-H culture of like happy, honest, humble, hungry, and I remember spending a lot of time with the upper management and our VP of engineering at the time of like how do we interview for like humble? How do we interview for honest? How should we actually make that happen? And we would do all kinds of interesting things around like, hey, tell us about some code that you're really proud of, and are they humble about it? Or are they, you know, it's one thing to be proud of what you've done. It's another thing to like, you know, be like arrogant and brag about what you've done. On the honest side of things, we would, because we had these multi-hour, interview processes where you'd be on site like most of the day, we would actually ask you the same question throughout the day to see whether you actually say like, oh, actually Ryan asked me that question earlier today, and or Ian actually asked me something really similar to that, and just or would they just go ahead and answer because they've had
Plow
time to
through.
think about it, and it's like, okay, well, were they really honest in speaking up of like, oh, you actually gave me that challenge earlier this morning, or you know um you know or would you just take it and be like, oh yeah, I totally know how to do this thing.
Slam
Yeah,
dunk, right?
right. um
Yeah.
but
No,
but at
it's
the end of the day, it was
tricky.
very subjective to try to like interview for those kinds of qualities. But those were the kind of people that we wanted to work with, and so we had to really pay attention to like good interviewing questions about, tell us about a time when, and really digging in on the behavioral side of it that overlapped with the engineering side of it, and trying to come up with really good questions about how do we test for those kinds of things. And company culture is really important to a lot of businesses, but trying to figure out how to interview for those culture types of things is actually a really tricky thing to do, because you have to be careful not to cross boundaries and cross lines of, you know, uh, getting into questions that are illegal to ask. Tell us about a time that you had to like miss a family event, to handle an incident or whatever. It's like, well, now you're
Right.
finding out whether they have a family, which is illegal to ask. It's
Right.
just, it's tricky to do.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think acknowledging too that like there's questions that I think are easier for broader groups of people to answer, and some tech questions that are definitely more on like the end of privilege, right? So for example, like trying to keep it to work related activities as opposed to like digging into like, well, what kind of side projects have you been digging into, right? And I think for me that was like made really evident after like I had a kid and I was like, oh my gosh, like
Mm.
my whole world of what do you do during the weekends, Ryan? It's like, well, I troll Hacker News, and I study my notes from like the work week, and I like just learned about like indexing and Postgres, like because that's something I needed for work, as opposed to like,
Right.
well, I was white knuckling it for the whole weekend because my 3-year-old like doesn't sleep and like my whole life is
Yeah.
chaos, right? So for me, it was like this really stark where it was like, oh, like I suddenly completely understand the argument of like you
Mm.
can't ask someone like what their
Yeah.
open source contributions look like, or at least
Right.
not without like qualifying that in a pretty big way.
Yeah, it's a good point. About exposing privilege and things. And Bakari, who was on our stream last week, is actually hanging out in chat right now. Said, I get questions all the time that pressure me to reveal info about my health and disability. Like those questions in a lot of states are actually illegal to ask. But interviewers are trying to like find out as much information about you as possible. I remember, even at SendGrid, where we would have them kind of wait out by reception, and we would go out and get them and like walk them back to the interview room. It's like, what's your weekend looking like, or what did you do last weekend and whatever. And like the interview already started at that point. Like we're trying to find out information. Like the interview doesn't start when you get in that room and they close the door. Like the interview has already started with that whole walk down the hall of like, what'd you do this weekend? Did you do anything fun? You hang out with family or anything like that? Like, you know, we can start to get information about you, and we're making all these mental notes of like, are they wearing a wedding band? Like we can try to ask questions around what we're really trying to get at and see if we can like find sneaky ways to ask questions without being really overt about it. I remember my interview process. I don't think you were there when Emmanuel Mwangi was on the team. But when I interviewed with Jose. So Jose was like the last interview, and he brought Emmanuel in, who was on our web development team at the time, and we had Emmanuel on the stream last summer. And during the interview process, Jose is asking me all kinds of questions. He's one of the founders, right? And so I'm like trying to really pay attention. Like, this guy's a founder of the company. I better not mess this up. And I'm going through all the questions, and really good rapport with both Jose and Emmanuel in the interview. And at the end of it, Jose's like, "Well, I think that's all the questions I got. Like, Emmanuel, do you have any other questions for him?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got a really important question. Ian, are you an ale or a lager kind of guy?" And Jose's like, "You're not allowed to ask that. Like, stop. Don't answer that question." And I'm like, and he like freaked out on Emmanuel at the time. It's like, no, it's cool. Like, I prefer a lager. But like, we're not allowed to ask about like alcohol consumption. Like, there's just certain things you're not allowed to ask. And I think you have to be careful as a candidate of like, how do you tiptoe around an answer and like figure out how you're going to answer those kinds of questions delicately, because you want to maintain that rapport, and you want to be a team player, but you also have to be careful about like giving away information that they don't need to know about you yet. Like, it's tricky to do. um
Yeah, and I mentioned before about when I was both being interviewed for the incident command role and interviewing folks for that role, and I mentioned the notion of storytelling, and I think storytelling is sort of like the Swiss Army knife of interview skills, right? Like if you can tell your story well and you get the point across that you're interested in giving and it's entertaining and it doesn't like show your hand too much, like that is like that sort of like knife's edge balance that you're walking. So something that I've done for the last couple times that I've interviewed now is like come up with like the hardest interview questions that I could imagine someone answering, like asking me, right? And then come up with those answers and then literally deliver them. Like practice telling that exact story, and like go through and like have somebody listen to it and then be like, oh, okay, like, well, when you framed it this way, like that really seemed like you didn't like
yeah.
that person, right? Or like that was
Mm.
negative, right? And getting that feedback for me was sort of mind blowing, right? Because I always was like, oh, I'm a good
Yeah.
storyteller, like I interface well with humans, but to like be more myopic about it and to like really dig into the very specific stories that I was going to tell, like really
Right.
helped me a ton.
Curious, Eric. Thanks for the new follow. Ryan, can you give us a better example, or like a more specific kind of example? Because I'm a big believer too in like practice your interviewing with someone else, but it has to be with someone who can actually give you good feedback. Because like, I could sit down and like say to my kid like, hey, ask me this question, tell me what you think about the answer. Like, they're just gonna be like, okay, that was a good answer, Dad. Like, good
Good
job,
job.
right? Like, you have to be able to trust that the person giving you the feedback is going to give you quality feedback around like, hey, that sounded negative. But like, can you give us a more specific example of like something that you had to practice?
um Yeah. So I think I was practicing a question around what was it? Basically, like a failure state. Like where like describe a time when you had to like had adversity in a project, and then what you did to sort of like succeed regardless of that adversity. And in the course of the story, I was talking about someone like a PM, an internal PM that was giving a ton of resistance and was basically pushing back in a very big way that wasn't aligned. It was sort of like disproportionately uh, sort of political in a lot of ways, and the way that I framed that story and told that was like pretty negative. Like it actually made me sound kind of like a jerk, or like I was like trying to like circumnavigate some sort of like leadership decisions. I think that was a big thing. And another interesting takeaway that I had in telling that story to this friend who was evaluating my responses is that I didn't reference this PM's gender until the very end of the whole thing, and in doing so, like, it actually made it sound like I had sort of an axe to grind against her,
Hmm.
and it was sort of this, like,
Gotcha.
it was one of those things that I think in telling the story, right, like, if you weren't paying a lot of attention, like, someone could pick up that signal and you would leave feeling like, "Yeah, like, I nailed that thing. That was an awesome answer," you know? And he called out those 2 things, and I was like, "Oh, wow." Like, that actually could have, like, painted me in, like, not a great light. And all of it was like word choice and tone and like choosing to like use a pronoun versus not use a pronoun. So it was like these sort of like subtle things. And I guess to touch on your point of like who can do that for you. I had a really good friend who's in a totally different industry, but is a hiring manager. So I was able to just like have like gave him questions, you know, and I was like, here are questions. I just need you to read them. I don't need you to understand them. And then like I told the stories associated with those questions, and he was able to sort of give me that like sentiment analysis of like, yeah,
Interesting.
no, like like there was weird friction here. So
Yeah. Hmm.
I don't know where everyone can find those people necessarily. But I definitely think that like I feel like we spend a lot of time professionally talking about mentorship, Ian. But I feel like finding a mentor, someone that has been in the field for a while, whether they've been a hiring manager or not, I think is a little bit less important. It's mostly if they've just been through a lot of interviews. I think is that is the kind of person that I think I would hope for in terms of getting that good feedback.
I would say more than just being in a lot of interviews, but having several jobs. I think because I could go to 100 interviews, and if I'm bad at interviewing, and if I go to 100 interviews and I've had 2 jobs, that's pretty telling about how well I can do an interview. But
Totally.
if I can do like few interviews and get few jobs out of it, then I'm maybe better at doing interviewing, and that would be the kind of person I would want to chat with about like how did you get through those? How did you get so many job offers from only a handful of interviews, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not to brag on myself, but like I did a job hunt a year ago, and I interviewed with 30 companies. I had 6 job offers, because I can quickly narrow down like what are they really getting at in this interview, and what are they really trying to get at asking that kind of question. Like what do they really want to hear, and being able to really discern that and distill that. And that's a lot of why I do this live stream, is just to kind of distill that information and give it back to people about like if they ask this kind of question, these are the kinds of things you can say. And you can go check out the YouTube channel and whatever. I got lots of playlists and stuff on behavioral questions and general questions. I've got the email newsletter as well that you can subscribe to, if you want to go check out the email series, to go see like why do we ask these kinds of questions, and what are those questions really getting at. It can be a big game changer. But I agree with what you're saying, Ryan, is like you need to find somebody who's had the experience that you're trying to get, and really getting from them like, hey, like if I give this as an answer, is this a good answer? Is this a bad answer? What could I change about it? And I think too, like mentorship comes in a lot of different forms, and trying to find who to have as a mentor can also be a challenge. But I think letting people know, like, hey, you know what, we don't have to hop on a call like this. Like, if I, you know, like send someone a message and say, hey, if I get a behavioral question that says this and I give this kind of explanation, is that good or bad? And let them do it asynchronously. You don't have to hop on a Zoom call and practice, or, hang out and have a coffee or something like that to practice these things. You can just say, like, hey, I'm practicing these behavioral questions. Here's like a 2 paragraph answer I might do. Could you just skim over this and like send them an analysis of like yes, no, or like, hey, like don't say it that way, like don't word it that way. I think can make a big difference with people, especially if it's asynchronous. It's like give me like a day. People know if you send me a message, I'm probably going to respond within 24 hours. Just be patient. I will get back to you, at some point. But I get some people that are very impatient. They'll DM me a question and then they go and do their own thing, and then I get back to them and like, oh, I should have done it that way. It's like, well, yeah, like be patient if you can ask for help. Like be patient and wait for a response before acting on it.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that another way, and this is something that we've actually been doing in our company, um, as far as like asynchronous communication and feedback, is using something like Loom. And I'm not sure if you've used Loom before, Ian,
Yep.
but I think it's free if you want less than a 5 minute recording. But I think that has huge benefits for things like interview questions. Is one, you can like listen to yourself, and then two, you can share that out, and people can just like comment in line or like thumbs up in line.
It's a great
So it's like
idea.
you can, yeah, you can remove a lot of the friction, I would imagine, from some of those interactions for someone by just making it easy, right? I can listen to you
Mhm.
at double speed. I can do whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
That's actually
just
a
a
really
thought.
good idea. I would have. I mean, I commonly tell people like record your voice and like listen to it again, whether you have like a little, digital recorder or, do it on your phone or whatever. But the idea of using something like Loom where people can give you feedback on it is kind of a neat idea. I hadn't thought of that. Will So you said it's free for less than 5 minute videos. Do they give you like
I think
unlimited
so.
videos, or is there like a limit on how many videos you can have?
No, I'm not sure. I'll double check right now. I know that our
Yeah.
company has. What does it look like? Oh yeah. So you can create up to a 5 minute video, up to 25 videos per person,
Okay.
and that's free. So starter pack.
Yeah. So do that as a practice, and then as people give you feedback, go back, review that feedback, and then delete the video and free up some video slots for doing it again. That's actually a really great idea. Yeah, I'm gonna promote the heck out of that one now. I'm gonna like take a little clip of this and say, go do that. No,
Perfect.
it's a good idea. So record your voice on Loom, like record yourself on Loom answering a behavioral question, and then send that to people where they can leave actual comment and feedback within Loom for you. Um, or I would say you could probably just like if you don't want to use something like Loom, like if you use an Android phone, for example, you could record your video, put it on like Google Photos, and then make a shared album out of that and let people go and watch those because you can leave comments on Google Photo albums. So you invite specific people, and then you can see their comments or whatever that they leave. That would be a way of doing it for free because it doesn't
Yeah,
cost anything to upload those to Google. But
I'm trying to think of what other platforms are ubiquitous. I think another, if you wanted to grossly abuse the platform, like Marco Polo, I think could be pretty interesting,
I
which
haven't
is
used that. What's
just
that
like
one?
it's a video chat social media platform from a handful of
Okay.
years ago. I think they're still around, but it would be really similar to a Loom of like you can record a video up to some amount of time and then people can like leave comments on it, but it's more social in nature than Loom, whereas Loom is
Gotcha.
definitely more of a business application. But
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I would use something like a TikTok or something like that. Like, I think that might be a bit much because then you're going to get all kinds of random people leaving you comments. But I think if you can do something where very targeted, you give something to a very targeted group of people and say like, hey, come check out this video. I'm looking for feedback on this specific thing. Like, did I word this well? Does this come across positive or negative? Like, what are your overall feelings? And if you can get other hiring managers or team leads or whatever to listen to those, I think that's where you're going to get a lot of benefit because they're going to give you very direct feedback on like, hey, Ryan, if you were in an interview with me and I answered this question this way, would that come across positive or negative, or like what could I improve about this answer? Even if they don't understand the context of like your background or things like that, I think just being able to, like you say, lower that bar to where I can just watch a video where you say, "Hey, this is a question that I want to practice. Here's my answer. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Give me some feedback on it." Make that as easy as possible for me to give you that feedback and say, "Hey, I would probably word this a little bit differently." Even if I don't understand the full context of the story that you're telling me, I can kind of just listen to just that answer. And maybe I can't say like, "Oh, you know what? Don't talk about so and so. Talk about this person instead." Like unless I really know your background, then you're going to get very generic feedback, and then it's up to you on how you want to apply that feedback.
yeah, definitely. And one of the advantages too with something like that is you could have, or I think another friction reducing thing that you could do, right, is very specific questions of like, how does how does my tone sound, right? Or like, I've been working on like this story specifically. Does this flow? Is it funny, or like is it just sort of like, does it fall flat?
Yeah.
But I think queuing up those very specific questions can also help make the person who you're sending this to just like more inclined to respond, making the
Yeah.
whole process smoother and easier. So
Yeah. And I agree. Like it's important to practice these things. I've seen so many interviews where it's like, oh, I'm not gonna go through behavioral questions. I'm just gonna show up. Like I know how I want to answer these questions, but like unless you actually practice these answers, like, are you telling it sort of in a chronological order, or is it gonna feel like a Quentin Tarantino movie where you're jumping around present to past to future to present, kind of thing of like you got to tell the story in order sometimes. Like sometimes it's like, okay, well, this is where I'm at now, but to give you some context, let me go here and now let's go back to the present and like move forward from there. Like sometimes that's okay, but you don't want to confuse your interviewer of them like trying to keep track of a timeline. So just give it in a chronological order. And sometimes that means like sitting down, writing it out and go, oh, I need to explain this first and then get into this. Sometimes I think just writing it down is enough. And if you can write it down into like 2 paragraphs, that's probably enough as far as like how to answer that question. Because you don't want to go on and on and on and on and on. I know I drone on and on quite a lot too. But like, you have to be succinct about it. And if they've got follow-up questions, they'll give you follow-up questions. But you don't want to give like a 10-minute story for every question they ask. Like they've got a lot of questions they want to get through where they get a lot of context, but you have to be careful not to overshare on things too, I think.
totally, yeah, getting into the nuance is hard because it's exciting, right? It's like stuff that conceivably you've done. It's your story. It's things you're excited about. But
Right.
having someone gut check that of like, does this have the basic structure of a story, right? Does this have a beginning, a middle, and an end? Which sounds really basic, but I think having both like good framing up front helps keep you on track. And then like having something compelling to talk about in the middle, some conflict, right? And then a conclusion where you're like, and this is how it relates back to the question that you asked
Right.
me. I think all of those things are what make for really good responses, and responses that as an interviewer I'm like, oh cool, like
That's going to really stand out and
they're
be memorable.
they're
Yeah.
put together, right?
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day
And
it's me as a hiring person like grabbing pull quotes from this, right? And if I can like get a good pull quote and like scribble that in my notebook and then come back to the group of people who were
mm,
evaluating you as a candidate and we're like, oh yeah, like right here, this demonstrates exactly what we're talking about in this job description. Then everybody's like, oh cool, that's not a thing we have to talk about, right? So
yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. That's good. So yeah, I mean, practice is important. You want to be memorable, but in a good way. Um, I've certainly had a lot of memorable in a bad way interview candidates over the years. Going back and talking about the interview process that we had, where we would do a phone screen and we would do that whole bucket sort of logic question, and then say, okay, cool, now we want you to build a web app about it. We had somebody get through the phone screen, send us in the web app, and I looked it over and I'm like, all right, it does kind of what I'm looking for. There's some bugs. People would usually like not do testing. They would typically not do like a lot of validation, like because we would say like you got a 3 gallon bucket, 5 gallon bucket. How do you measure 4 gallons? So you needed 3 input fields, and then tell us whether it was possible, and if it was possible, what were the steps? Um, and people would just put in numbers and then like, or they would put in numbers that they know would work or numbers that would very blatantly not work, but they wouldn't test for like negative values. So they wouldn't test, what if I put a string in here, what if I put a poop
simple,
emoji in
yeah.
here, like what's going to happen, like just you kind of have to think about those things as a web developer of like some edge cases and so on. And people would often miss those, and I would still have them come in and do the interview anyway. But I would say, okay, cool, we're gonna pull up this code that you wrote, and I've got a new feature that I want you to add, where it's like add a third bucket and see whether it's still possible. Like how could you make this like a multi-bucket kind of thing, or go fix this bug. Like your validation doesn't work if I put in like a negative number. Like how would you fix those kinds of things? And this one person got through the phone screen, sent us in the code, and I'm like, this code looks pretty good. They get in the interview, and I'm like, hey, got a feature I want you to add. I got a bug I want you to fix. Or typically, I would say I've got 2 features and 2 bugs, and you get to pick any 2 things that you want to do. because that was also telling as a team lead too of like, are they willing to dive in on bugs? Do they only want to implement new things? Are they willing to do a bit of both? And I was always hoping that they would do a bit of both, so I could see how they would add something new to existing code, but also how would they fix a problem, or if they're like, oh no, I broke something, I only want to focus on fixing bugs, like that could be a positive too. But if they only want to build new things, then I kind of that was a bit of a negative for me of like, oh, they don't want to go fix things, they only want to work on new stuff. So that was kind of how I did that. But this person came in and they had no idea like how to fix the bug. Um, and or how to add a new feature because they didn't write the code. They had their friend write the code for them. I'm like, what was your hope here today? Like coming in and doing this interview and like you don't like how are you gonna get through this interview? Like because we would tell them ahead of time, like you're gonna come in, you like bring your laptop. We're gonna have you work on your own code. And they showed up and brought a laptop, and I'm like, all right, here's a bug I want you to fix. And they didn't even know where to go look in the code to go fix the bug. I'm like, did you write the code? They were like, no, my friend wrote the code. I'm like, did you even look at the code? Like you like like I get it. And I tried to go through the interview anyway. I'm like, okay, you know what? Your first day on the job here, you're gonna see code that you've never seen before. You're still gonna have to figure out how do I trace through this to figure out where the bug is? How do I figure out how I'm gonna fix this bug? And they couldn't even do that. And I'm like, all right, well, the interview's over then. And
Yeah,
so
thanks.
I actually wrote up that whole story on Quora, and it's had like 1.5 million views and whatever. And the number one comment I got when I wrote this whole thing up was like, "Did you hire their friend?" It's like, no, I didn't even ask who their friend was. It's like, because like what, like I'm not going to call you and be like, hey Ryan, could you write me some code, that does such and such, like just on a whim. It's like I'm
It's
gonna have to
for an
explain to you like
interview.
why I need you to
Thanks.
do that code. It's like I need you to help me get through this interview. It's like which means the friend would have been in on it too. It's like, well, then why would I hire the friend? If they're willing to be dishonest about it too. So
In terms of the 4 H's at SendGrid, that definitely would have dinged the honest one for sure.
yeah, yeah, good times.
Um,
Um, So, like you talked a little bit about your interview process and some of the things that you look for. What are some other things that sort of stand out to you from a candidate point of view? So you mentioned like being a good storyteller and being able to keep a level head, but like those are more what we would consider like soft skills, but also very important skills. I think a lot of times people underestimate the value of soft skills. But what are some other skills like maybe from the technical side of things that you would screen for? Like what are some of the more technical aspects that you would do in your interview?
I think I'll use the incident command role as an example. I feel like I've been hiring for a bunch of, or I've been on a lot of other hiring committees for things like technical support engineers and things like that. But I think it's probably true here for both of these roles. But um, for a role that is interfacing with technical teams and interfacing with engineers, like I think just a basic understanding of how applications work or can work. I don't think people need to be able to describe to the nth degree, like how the internet works necessarily. But I think like having some basic building blocks that you can speak to, so that you can reason through problems with other folks that are more technical, right? Like if as an engineer someone comes in and tells me that the caching layer is down, like I need to understand conceptually like I need to be able to ask some additional questions of like, okay, what are we caching, right? Is this an internal caching layer or is this like customer facing? Is this sitting on a CDN somewhere or is this sitting like
Mhm.
inside our infrastructure or internal somewhere? So I think being able to not needing to be able to like build, a caching mechanism from scratch or even necessarily implement it, but be able to ask the questions around it to understand like what the implications could be for whatever problem you're digging into.
Mm.
So I would say it's like, hey, you need to be able to. I need to probably be able to speak to what it's like to have services or applications speaking like over an API, right? Like, what does that pattern look like? What kind of things can go wrong there? Probably need to understand something that sounds like a caching issue versus like a persistence issue versus something else, right? So I think just like people being able to put their arms pretty broadly around like modern web practices, but not necessarily speak to a specific language, or a specific algorithm.
Okay. You mentioned earlier, like interviewing for things like bubble sort and whatever wouldn't make sense for your kind of role. Do you think that those kinds of algorithms are still helpful in a modern software kind of interview?
I mean, in my opinion, if you're interviewing for something that people don't encounter at least quarterly in their job, it's probably not worth it, right? If you are needing to write algorithms in your job, then absolutely a bubble sort or like some kind of B tree type exercise probably makes some sense. But if you're gluing together like framework stuff, right? Or if you're just like dealing, for example, and a lot of folks that I chat with are SREs, like if you're just dealing with cloud infrastructure and like sort of piping things together, then like questions more along those lines are definitely going to be helpful. I think just like with the team and process, it's all contextual, right? So to say like, no, algorithms are dead, they're like a dinosaur sort of thing probably doesn't make sense because someone out there is doing, they're building algorithms like as part of their day-to-day job.
Right.
But I would say most of the jobs that I've been in, it's probably more interesting to dig into like how people think about debugging, right? Or how people think about building new features, or how do you account for the customer, like in some sort of work that you're undertaking. I think those are much more interesting questions than like straight up like how big are your technical chops.
Right. Yeah. And something I kind of go back to, and I know that this is a bit of a touchy subject around the idea of everybody on our engineering team needs to have a bachelor's degree in computer science, which is something that we faced at SendGrid. We had a VP who was very adamant about everybody must have a CS degree. It's like, why? They're writing JavaScript and HTML and like CSS or CoffeeScript or, whatever we were using at the time, like SAS and SCSS and whatever. It's like, do they really need to have a CS degree? And they like doubled down on it. Like we pushed back and they doubled down. They're like, no, everybody must have a CS degree. It's like, why? Like not everybody has to have a CS degree to do this job. And, I mean, you came in the team, you didn't have a CS degree. Other people on the team didn't have CS degrees. And, some of them were effectively pushed out of the company and saying like, you're not going to succeed here without a CS degree. Like, and that's something that I talk about a lot on the stream too, is you don't have to have a CS degree to do this kind of job. For a lot of the development that happens in a lot of companies, you do not have to have the deep architectural understanding of like, this is what goes on in the processor, and this is how the processor addresses RAM, and this is how like all this stuff happens at this really super low level. It's like it's kind of interesting to know, but you don't have to have that deep level understanding to do most of what we do on a day-to-day job. And I think trying to interview for a lot of those algorithmic types questions, like what we call like leak code problems, I don't think is really helpful a lot of times. But a lot of companies are like, oh well, that's how I interviewed, so I'm just going to keep sort of propagating that because that's how I had to do an interview, so I'm going to keep doing that as an interview.
Or my
um,
favorite, Google does it this way, right? And it's like, well,
right.
you don't have Google problems, I'm sorry. Like
Yeah, well, but the other thing is people leave Google and they go to these other companies and are like, well, that's how I interviewed at Google, so
right.
I'm going to keep doing that interview here. So it's not just we want to be like Google, but those people go out and be like, well, I came from Google and this is how we interviewed, so I'm just going to continue to interview that way because that's how we found good people to work on the team. But it's very excluding from that perspective. You're going to lose out on a lot of people. There's a lot of good background and culture fit and things like that that you're going to completely miss out on when you put unrealistic things like that on people and expect that they're going to be effective on the team.
No. And I think at the end of the day, if you sit down and you chat with a recent CS grad who's determined that they've learned everything they need to and that they're good now because they have a CS degree, as opposed to like a hungry and curious boot camp grad, like I would take the boot camp grad every day of the week, right? Like
Mm.
you want people that are excited about the space and are curious and are interested, because one thing that I feel like I can say with certainty is that like change is the only constant in tech. And like even if you have a pristine understanding of whatever tech stack you're being hired for, in a month it's going to be a little bit older, and in a year probably like a quarter of it's going to be worthless, and in 2 years it's going to be gone, right? So it's much more about like, how can you learn? Are you curious, and are you willing to acknowledge when you don't know things and to go dig into it, right? That's much more important than like what are your current standings with lead code, or how fresh is your
Yeah.
CS degree.
Right. Yeah. RC Maniac says in chat, do I need to bring up my interview with a hardware company? I mean, they used to be very much you need some fancy degree or certification in order to work there. I went to interview with them, apparently reformed, and the people straight up said, "You're amazing. I really hope we hire you." And then I got rejected because I didn't have a PhD. The hiring team said, "Hire him," and the CEO said, "No PhD, no hire." Like that's ridiculous at that point. Like it's more than just like you must have a degree. It's like you must have an advanced degree. It's like why would you do that? Like and then get through the interview process to where the team's like, we absolutely want to hire this person, and then have some higher up person like make a call and be like, nope, no degree. I'm gonna veto that. It's like yeah, it bugs
No.
me when companies have a stance of like you must like yes, there are certain kinds of roles where having a certification in something is absolutely going to help. Like if you're gonna aim for like an architect kind of role, then yes, you should have some certification in some cloud platforms to show that you can architect the different pieces of AWS or Google Cloud or Azure or whatever to like put together some kind of semblance of an answer. But even that's not really necessary if you understand what those components are and how they communicate and how you're going to sort of fit that whole thing together. But if you're going for a security type of role, like having some security certifications, like, yeah, that can be helpful. But like, is a CS degree really helpful for a lot of what we do? It's like you can learn that kind of stuff on the job. Like, I think a lot of the teamwork and a lot of, like we were talking about soft skills, I think really outweigh the benefit of a lot of the technical certifications. Like, yes, you need to be able to demonstrate your skill. You need to be able to code. You need to be able to like think through a problem and break that problem down and, solve the bits and pieces and come up with a solution. But like, do you have to have like advanced algorithmic thinking in order to do that? And I'm not sure. I don't think you do.
Yeah, and I would say that in the case of the no PhD, no hire, like you probably dodged a bullet there at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
for sure.
Like the
Absolutely.
responses of a lot of these companies, if they're like really negative, for oftentimes I'm like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have done well there anyway. So
Yeah, for sure. Twisted Mood, good to have you in chat. First time question. How hard is it to get into embedded systems if I've never had a programming job? I'm not sure which field to go into. I have a year and a half left in college and I've never had an internship. Um, I would say getting into embedded systems, you have to have a pretty good understanding of how the hardware is working and how you're kind of pushing data around hardware to really understand what kind of embedded system you're working in and the benefits of doing things a particular way. I did my first several years of my career in embedded systems, and of course, this was also like 25 odd years ago. So our hardware platforms were very different, but like being able to write really tight, really efficient, really, really effective code in as small a space as possible was really necessary for us back then. But like nowadays, like, you know, I don't have like the micro SD card, but like you can get like little SD cards with like a terabyte of memory on them now. Where back in the day, we had these giant clunky chips the size of my Swiss Army knife that held like 8 kilobytes of memory. And like all of your code, all of your RAM had to fit in that 8K. So it's a very different sort of way of thinking now. And the CPUs and whatever, even in embedded systems, are a lot more powerful now than we had back then. But you're probably still going to be working with 32 or 64-bit systems. So I would say it's it's not impossible if you've got a year and a half left. If that's something that really interests you and you want to pursue that, it's possible, but you're going to have to really have a good understanding of like why you want to get into that. Why are you passionate about that? And I talk a lot about that on the stream of like how do you stand out as a candidate, and a lot of it comes down to how do you show the company that I really care about this aspect. Here's some project work that I've done or some low level work that I've done, I would say to really stand out as a candidate, like see if you can pick up like a cheap Arduino kit. You can buy them for like $10. You can literally buy a little ESP32 card on Amazon for probably like $4 or $5, and it just plugs in a USB port, and you can program it and write some code just to make a little LED blink, or like plug in some other sensors that are like a few dollars each, and go read a bunch of like low level system calls and do something with that data, do something interesting with that. And I think that's how you're going to really stand out to a company. um, it's I would say, is it hard to get into that kind of role? I mean, it really depends what aspect of embedded systems you want to get into. If you want to get into like low level coding, then you're going to have some idea about like how to interact with those sensors and how to pull data or push data. um, but that's all pretty basic software. As far as like making API calls to the library of like, go read this value in memory, or go write this value into this part of memory, which will then trigger some hardware action. So a few milliseconds later, go back and read that back. And does it need to be real time or just not? um, they followed up in chat, said, I've studied C++. I haven't used it in a while. I never studied C. C++ will be really useful for like Arduino boards and things like that. If you're going to do like a Raspberry Pi, you mentioned you have a Raspberry Pi Zero. You can write Python code on a Raspberry Pi, but you can also get into low-level coding as well. You can do C++ and compile that on the Raspberry Pi as well. The Raspberry Pi, I think, is a fantastic system because it's a whole operating system on top of the hardware. And so you've got like a full Linux operating system that you can do things, and you can compile your code right on the Raspberry Pi. So you don't have to compile it externally and push that code into the Raspberry Pi like you would have to do with an Arduino. You can literally plug the Raspberry Pi into a monitor and a keyboard and like run directly off of that. In fact, this is like one of my favorite things now, is it's a Raspberry Pi in a keyboard, and you've got all the ports on the back, basically like the monitor and the keyboard and the little SD card slot and whatever. And that just plugs directly into a monitor, and you've got the keyboard right there. You can plug a mouse into that, and you've got a Raspberry Pi ready to go. But having a Raspberry Pi, I think, is going to be a good start. If you can again go buy like some sensors, or buy like a what we call them, is it the hat? Or I think that's the Arduino term, but it's the little circuit that you plug on top of the Raspberry Pi to interact with different kinds of hardware. If you've got a year and a half left, I would say like start tinkering with some of that stuff on the side, and see like what really interests you in doing that. Like what's sort of driving your motivation for going into that type of role. Um, it's absolutely possible to get into that. Now, is that considered like a true embedded system? Maybe not on the Raspberry Pi level. I think an Arduino would be closer to what I would consider an embedded system, but it's still giving you direct access into the hardware, where you're like poking data from hardware, and like getting data back from hardware, and things like that. Maybe like look for an internship at a hardware level company and say like, hey, I'm interested in doing an internship. I want to learn about this kind of stuff. It's totally possible. I think it's absolutely possible. You've got time to sort of plan for it. Yep.
And I wanted to toss out one
Yeah.
other, maybe like less technical bit in terms of just breaking in. Something that I did early in my career is I basically had, my byline was like, here are the things that I know, and like, here are the things that I don't know. And here is like how I'm trying to sort of remedy that gap. And then I would show up at as many events as I possibly could. So I volunteered for RubyConf and RailsConf, for example, and would like pay for the ticket and fly out there, and like crashed with a friend who was going in their hotel room, and then just like volunteered and met as many people as I could. And it felt like having, that base modicum of technical competence that Ian was talking about, plus building your network early on and letting folks know in person, if you can, or virtually, that like you're enthused, that you're excited about this stuff. And I feel like that for me was a good playbook for breaking into an industry that I probably didn't really have a right to be in otherwise. So thoughts?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So Twisted Mood followed up and said, I'd just like to be able to solve problems with code. I just have no idea what a good field to really focus on is. I solved a date picker customization in JavaScript at work, and that was fun, but I don't know if I want to focus on web development. I want to start streaming my projects to help build my network, but I'm a noob. It's okay to be a noob. Everybody starts somewhere. And I think part of it is the curiosity of tinker with this, tinker with that, see where you have an interest. And like you said, you've played around a little bit with JavaScript, and you're like, I don't know if front end is right for me, and that's okay too. A lot of that will come with sort of that understanding and the experience of being curious and trying a thing. And if it doesn't work out, okay, go try something else. And if that doesn't work out, okay, go try something else. Like you're still in school, you've got some time. Um, a lot of that's going to kind of juggle with how do I do my studies and pursue these interests. But I think that's a lot of what's going to drive where you want to take your career. And like I said, as you start taking those steps, you'll start to kind of learn about like what do I like and what don't I like. There was a quote that I heard a while back, and I forget who it was from, but they're basically like, if you stay in one spot and kind of look at all the choices in front of you and go, I don't know if I want to make that choice or that choice or that choice or that choice, but you stay in that position, then you end up with kind of this paralysis of like, I don't want to move because I'm afraid of making the wrong choice. Well, by making a choice and then looking at all of those other choices, you now have a different perspective on things. So if you think about like if I walk down this path and I go look at now all of these other destinations I could have gone, you now have a different perspective on looking at those other choices and go, oh yeah, you know what, this other choice would have been the exact same thing, or that other choice, actually looks much better now that I've made that initial move. And so if you think about like if you're on a game board and you're kind of moving around, you've got multiple directions that you could go, and now you're at a different position. And so looking at those other areas, it's a completely different view. And I think that that's important, especially in sorry, I think it's important to at least make a choice and say, you know what, I want to look at embedded systems for a while, and I'm going to tinker with that for 3 months. And if I like it, I like it. If I don't like it, I'll find something else. You've already got the Raspberry Pi, so you literally don't need to invest in anything else. Maybe a couple of $2 sensors or whatever that just plug into the Raspberry Pi to like go read some temperature or go read humidity or go read soil moisture or something like that, and just go build some little projects with that. See whether you enjoy it or not. And if you enjoy it, great, continue to pursue that. Maybe see if there's other classes that you can take, and then you can put that kind of project work on your resume so that when you apply for those internships, you can say, hey, I've done a little bit of stuff with Raspberry Pi. This is why I'm interested in this low level kind of coding and dealing with hardware, because there are hardware companies out there that need software developers to build software layers on top of the hardware that they build so that people can interact at a software level to interact with the hardware. They need kind of that level of embedded system software to be built. And so showing them that you can do that job is going to be an important part of getting that job. You have to be able to demonstrate skill. You can't just walk into a company and say, hey, I'm really interested in doing this thing, but I've never done it before. Like very, very, very few companies are going to be like, all right, let's take a chance. Ryan has never done this before, so let's hire Ryan. That's not going to happen, especially in today's job market. They want to know that you have some level of experience in that thing in order to get that job. So tinker with it for a little bit. And you might realize 3 months from now, it's like, you know what? I don't enjoy that as much as I thought. Or actually, yeah, I'm really digging this. I really want to get into this. Now you've got other choices that you can make. But I think staying in one spot and go, well, I could go into web dev, I could go into embedded systems, I could go into real time, I could go into operating systems, and I don't know what to do. Unless you make a move, none of those choices change, and none of your perspective on those choices is going to change.
And I think that Ian and I are both, I would say, living artifacts of the fact that a career is a journey, right? And what you're doing now isn't what you need to be doing forever. And there's also not clear paths. The fact that I was on a product that had a lot of incidents set me up well to go be an incident commander. The fact that I have a background in like crisis management in the real world meant that like doing that on software is more attractive for me. I would be bald-faced lying if I said, oh yeah, like when I was living in a tent, 15 years ago, I was like, someday I'm going to be a responder advocate for an incident management tool, right? Like
Right.
that's just not how it works. At the end of the day, it's really just taking these like interesting and maybe seemingly not exactly complementary, but actually complementary skills and like forming what is like a cool journey. At least that's how
Yeah.
I've approached my career.
Yeah, for sure. Twisted Mood followed up in chat. So with the website idea, so they were asking like, should I host a website on a Raspberry Pi? And I generally wouldn't. It's going to be slower, but like if you're going to build a website, you want it to be publicly accessible all the time. And there's lots of platforms out there that'll do that for free. Um, so they followed up and said, should I do a full course for developing a full stack app, or should I try to struggle with it and use Google for my problems? I mean, you kind of answered that question for yourself earlier, where you said you didn't really enjoy web development. So if you're not enjoying it, why spend time on it? Like, it's helpful if you can build like a portfolio site and say, here's a link to my GitHub and some of the projects that I've built. If you can build like a little card based kind of interface, but like I wouldn't go like way down the rabbit hole and learn React and things like that. Like just learn enough HTML to like put some stuff on a page and say, these are some projects that I've built, and leave it at that. Go deploy that somewhere and point people to your GitHub profile. Or just put your GitHub profile on your resume and say, here's a list of projects that I've done, but be really good at writing like README files on those GitHub projects where you're explaining like, this is what I built and why I built it. Like this was my motivation behind it. Um, I think that's going to really draw people's attention, because they followed up in chat again, said, I have a goal to work for NASA someday and make software for satellites or probes. Web development's not going to help them a bit with that. So if that's really your goal, then I would say embedded systems is where you're going to need to go. And I would focus on that. Make that your goal. Make that your journey, or at least the start of your journey. Like Ryan said, it's a journey. You got to take some steps. And unless you start taking steps, you're not going to progress on that journey. And then they followed up one last question, said, side question, tips for getting through a DSA course and all the sorting algorithms. I would say memorizing the code is not helpful. Memorizing the strategy of how to solve a particular kind of problem is going to help more. Like, what's the strategy behind a depth first search? What's the strategy behind recursion? And having an understanding of like, at a really high level, here's how to solve this kind of problem. Because a lot of what we do as programmers is the strategy of like, oh, I've seen something like this before. Here's how I applied it last time, as opposed to here are the exact 5 lines of code that I need to go do that thing. Because your programming language is going to change over time. Your approach is going to change over time. So memorizing code is not going to be helpful, but understanding the strategy and is what's going to get you through that. And I would say the best way to do that is practice writing pseudocode, and just having good pseudocode and then turning that pseudocode into real code later on.
I almost typed something out here, but I figured I would share. One
Cool.
other bit of advice that's less technical in nature is try and find someone that has broken into that space. Find
Mhm.
someone on LinkedIn who is like starting at NASA or has an internship at NASA, right? Or whatever the company is or whatever the role is that you want to be in. And I think I can give advice until I'm blue in the face, but it's going to be so much more impactful, right? To like hop in with them and get like, hey,
For sure.
here's what the interview was like, right? Or here is like what the experience is like actually being here. And maybe in the course of that, you learn that it's like this golden, city on the hill, but you also maybe learn like, oh, that's a horrible grind, or this is like something that's really, really not what I had expected. But for me, it's all about challenging those assumptions with like real world tests, trying to find the people that are doing the things that you want to be doing and like making sure that what I think about this thing lines up with that reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like find somebody that's already doing that job or has done that job in the past. Like find somebody who has done embedded systems for NASA and go talk to them. Like, what was your experience like? What was the interview process like? Why did you leave? I mean, people have reasons for leaving too. Like maybe it was the bureaucracy, or maybe the pace of things was too fast or too slow. Getting good information about why people are there, why people left, and especially what was that interview process like. What kinds of things should I be studying? Should I take this course or that course? And you're going to get a lot of information from folks. Or find go do a search on LinkedIn and look for people that are currently working in embedded systems and say, ask them these same questions like, hey, I've got a Raspberry Pi. What can I be doing with that Raspberry Pi? And get some ideas from them about, how can you read things and poke things and whatever. Like if you do that on your computer and you muck up your computer, now you've got like a much bigger problem. But with a Raspberry Pi, you just take out the SD card and reflash the SD card and start over again. Like it's no big deal. Um, so like I would say, go find people that are in the space and talk to them. And by working in the space, I don't mean like any pun intended working with NASA, but like go find people that are currently doing that job and talk to them about the interview, talk to them about their day to day. That's part of building out your network of people is like reaching out to people and say, I think I'm interested in this thing. Can we chat about it? Can you give me some ideas? Give me some tips? Give me some thoughts? That's how you're going to get to know people and start getting those recommendations. Maybe they're going to have an internship that you can apply for someday. And what would that look like? What are those internship interviews going to look like? Things like that. They asked in question, what did both of us do? That's a long answer. So Ryan and I worked together at a company like a decade ago, and we've kind of circled back and we've stayed in touch over the years. But we're now in very different kinds of roles. Back then, we were both software engineers. Now I'm doing more what we call developer advocacy or developer relations work, where I do a lot of technical talks and a lot of technical conferences and a lot of like education sort of content. I've also been a software teacher. Ryan, do you want to give like another synopsis of what you got into?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm an engineer turned engineering process nerd, and the current iteration of that is doing the kind of work that Ian mentioned, but specifically around the management of software incidents. So you have a bad deploy, you have some kind of processes for managing that inside of your organization, and I help folks get into and use a tool called Fire Hydrant, which is basically just like a chat bot with a bunch of other niceties and integrations that help other folks. So for me, my role is much less technical these days than it has been in the past. But I still lean on, I would say, all of those experiences on almost a daily basis from a, hey, I've been where you've been, like incident responder who's having a bad time. And like, I can meet you where you're at and then can help bring you to this better, more interesting place. So.
Yep. And also from a high level background, like I went through a computer engineering program. Ryan went through. Actually, what was your original education, Ryan?
My original education, I was originally an outdoor educator. So I have a degree in
Yeah.
adventure education, which was basically like almost a teaching degree and then almost like a degree in being a guide. And you sort of meld those together. And that was my
Like an
world.
outdoor sort of like learn how to live
Yeah.
outdoors.
Well,
Teach
yeah,
people how
like
to be Bear Grylls.
rafting, not quite that, but like, hey, you want to go on an expedition for like 30 days and like
Hmm.
teach folks a progression to go from
Yeah.
just being participants on that expedition to like
Right.
actually managing and running the expedition. So,
Yeah. Twisted Mood also asked, do we both still code for fun or did we get burned out on that? I still code all the time. Like the entire chatbot thing that you see going on right now, I wrote most of that chatbot. And I've got lots of, like, if you do exclamation point help, you'll see a bunch of help commands. I've got commands that make these lights blink behind me and all kinds of other home automation and stuff like that. So yeah, I still code all the time and still love it.
I'll tinker around, and there's parts of our product that are more technical and involve sort of wiring up APIs and like some templating, like the liquid templating language. And I always run towards opportunities to play in that stuff. I also have done really horrible things in Google Sheets, which is like my proxy these days for coding.
Yep. And Valhalla made a really good point. There's barely an industry out there these days that doesn't benefit from software on some level. If you can write software, you can put yourself into many different disciplines. Yeah, I mean, so many companies out there are trying to like get online, or they are online. They're trying to interact with other systems. Like, we have like customer information in this database, and we want to get over to this database. Like, how do we transfer that? Like, they need custom software to do that kind of stuff. So there's lots of opportunity out there for sure. I work in finance right now. Doesn't seem they want to do any in-house dev work except maybe Salesforce. Salesforce is huge though. You can make really good money if you know how to work with Salesforce, you can make like, really good 6-figure salaries. I've seen Salesforce devs make like, 150 to 200K just because they know how to interact with Salesforce databases on a really efficient level. Um, so yeah, Salesforce is actually a really good one to get into for sure. They are making bank RC. They also had some layoffs recently, but much smaller scale layoffs than other companies. But that's Salesforce as a company. Other companies that use Salesforce, they need programmers, and those are the companies that are like paying big bucks to know how to like make all these different things, work and how to build out their own automation systems and things like that for sure. Yep, good times. Cool. So yeah, feel free to drop other questions in chat. We've been going for close to 2 hours, so I think we might start to wrap up because don't want to keep Ryan on here all day long, and I've got other things to do today too. We do have a holiday week coming up, so I will not be streaming this coming Thursday. It's going to be Thanksgiving here in the United States, so I won't be streaming Thursday. I'm going to be cooking up a storm. Thursday is kind of my day to like nerd out in the kitchen. Love doing that kind of stuff. Ryan, you much into cooking? You doing anything fun for Thanksgiving?
We're gonna go non-traditional this year, and a couple friends and I are getting together, and we're gonna do sushi for
Nice.
Thanksgiving. So I'm probably gonna bring some like lunch meat and be that obnoxious guy who's like making like a cranberry sauce, like turkey roll or something. But no, it'll be
Lunch meat
pretty
sushi.
low key.
You're gonna put a slice
Gotta
of
be
ham on.
bowls, you know.
Gonna put a slice of ham on some rice and dip that in some wasabi.
I was thinking turkey, keep it on brand for the holiday,
Right,
but
it's fun. Did now I'm envisioning like turkey on rice and like dipping it into some cranberry soy or something like that. So
totally.
yeah, good
Yeah, we'll
times.
see.
Yeah, I'm much more traditional. I got like a 20-pound turkey thawing in the fridge down here, and got like a bag of cranberries to make up cranberry sauce. And yeah, we do everything from scratch around here. It's like my favorite thing to like sit down and cook and just roast up a turkey for hours, and while that's going, make all the potatoes and make all the sides and have it all planned out timing wise that everything's ready within like 10-15 minutes of each other, so that it's all nice and hot and ready to go. Making up a gallon of gravy and stuff like that to just drown everything in gravy. So good times,
Sounds
good times.
fantastic.
Yeah. Um, yeah, let's see. But yeah, if anyone in chat has questions, like we'll hang out for a few more minutes. If you got questions, please continue to ask questions. Twisted Mood says, "Sorry, I'm the only one asking questions." You never have to apologize for asking questions. It's exactly why my stream is here, is for people to come by and ask questions about this kind of stuff. So more on my history. I've been in the tech industry now for 26 and a half years. I've been doing this for a minute. That's why I got all the life highlights in the hair. Um, but I've been a hiring manager. I've been a director of engineering. I've held like upper level roles. I've done just about every kind of like software type of role. I've dabbled in DevOps and DBA duties for a while. I was literally racking servers at jobs and setting up networks and all that kind of stuff. So I've been in a lot of different facets uh, of development and companies, a lot of startups. So like really getting in the nitty gritty and like helping establish companies and watching them grow and so part of running this live stream is just helping people understand like these are all the different areas that you can get into in tech. Here's how to get through different kinds of interviews, and really understanding from a business perspective of why do we ask the questions that we do, and having folks like Ryan on the stream. Part of it's to reminisce and like remember the Mexico trips, at SendGrid, where we would all fly down to Mexico and we'd come back and inevitably like 3 or 4 people get fired for something that happened in Mexico.
My answer to that would be just barely most of the time.
Just barely remember or barely not get fired.
They were substantial trips, impactful, but
Yes.
oftentimes memories, got shed.
For sure, for sure. But a lot of it is just to hear like what was Ryan's background into tech, because I like having folks on the stream who don't take a traditional computer science kind of role into technology, or to have different folks, different backgrounds, different walks of life, and not just white men, like Ryan and I, but like having different people of color, people of different gender expressions on the stream to hear what it's like for them in tech, just to give everybody a face, everybody a voice, and having a lot of perspectives on here are things that you can do to get through the interviews. Here's how to build resumes. We do resume reviews. We talk about behavioral questions. We talked through some of those earlier. We dropped some links in chat about like STAR method and alternatives to STAR method to practice out behavioral interviews. Ryan dropped a great tip on how do we practice those. It's like record it on Loom, because then people can give you, feedback on like, hey, answer it this way next time, or like this part sounded a little bit negative. Those can all be really, really helpful, where you don't have to like put a video out on TikTok and be like, hey, I want feedback on this thing. It doesn't have to be widely public to the internet. You can make it very targeted and have people come in and give you feedback and things like that. Twisted Mood says, one more question then. Is it even possible to get an interview if I've only done personal projects that are more scripting based, or do I need to build large apps to impress hiring people? I have no internships, so I've never put my small projects on my resume. For example, I used a language called Auto IT to automate installation of 18 pieces of software for IT help desk. Is that impressive? Do I need to focus on that? I mean, that's impressive from the perspective of you've been able to like automate that kind of thing. Because a lot of companies are like, hey, we need to set up this computer in a hurry. Like, how do we automate installing certain kinds of packages? So those kinds of things can be really beneficial. If you don't have an internship, then absolutely putting any kind of personal project on there to demonstrate that you can do the job. They're not going to hire you unless you can demonstrate that you know how to do that job and you understand how to do that job. So having those kinds of projects on a resume absolutely is what you need. Big shout out to Freckled Science. Sorry, Ryan, real quick. Freckled Science. Amanda has a fantastic stream. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Freckled Science. Go check out Amanda's stream. Does lots of really cool like chemistry and like 3D printing algae or something last night on her stream. Really fantastic. Fellow Canadian. Gotta give shout outs to the Canucks out there. But go give Amanda a follow. Amanda's a really fantastic person. Loves education. Loves just interacting with her chat all the time. Really, really great stream. She makes messes for sure.
Twisted Mood. I guess one other thought too that's interesting is as a student, as someone who's earlier in their career, I don't think anyone is expecting you to have some huge project on your resume necessarily. Obviously, some people do, but like those are definitely the outliers. I think trying to target organizations that have arms like Ian mentioned earlier, right? Of was it SendGrid that had a specific group that was going out and sort of like catering to students and like sort of like courting student groups?
We did at SendGrid. We've also got the same thing at Postman too, where we like
Postman,
reach out
right.
to yeah.
Totally. So I think like trying to figure out which organizations are actively looking to like bring earlier career folks in is going to help a ton, right? Because then you're not competing against folks with a couple of years in the industry. You've really got I would say like a well targeted opportunity there.
Yep. So Matt actually asked, I have sort of a question. How do we do the question thing? So I mean, you can just drop questions in. I've also got an anonymous way to ask questions as well. So you can send a whisper over to my chat bot. If you want to ask a question in chat and you don't want your name attached because you don't want to, you think it's going to be silly or whatever, you can just send a whisper over to my chat bot and it'll show up in chat as an anonymous question. That will also start a thread over on Discord. So if you have follow-up, it'll like drop all that stuff. So even if I'm not streaming, you can always come by. Even when I'm not streaming, you can start sending whispers to the chatbot and it'll start a Discord thread as well. If you want to come hang out on our Discord, you're welcome to do that as well. But yeah, you never have to ask a question Say like, just drop questions in chat. That's why we're here. I love helping people out with this kind of stuff, from a technology point of view and understanding like what are even possibilities in the tech industry. Because I've been around, I've done things. I've seen some things. We've all seen some things in tech for sure. But yeah, feel free to just drop questions in chat. We'll address them as we can. And if I miss it, please re-ask the question. If I've ever missed something in there, please do that as well. But yeah, Twisted Mood, thanks for coming by and thanks for asking questions. That's exactly why I have this stream, is just to help people out, just to offer my perspective on things, or to have guests like Ryan on the stream and hear their perspective as well. But we've also got really fantastic people in chat, like RC Maniac is coming by a lot and offers a lot of perspective as well. So anybody with a little diamond next to their name, they're who I consider a VIP, which means they've been in the industry for a while, or they're very helpful with advice. So you can trust, anytime you see a diamond in chat, you can trust their advice and you can trust their perspective. It's people that I think are going to do a good job on that. Mark H says, can I ask if it's okay to ask if I can ask a question? Yes. So yeah, Twisted Mood, I would say, like, now you're thinking about passing on the website. I would say, like, get your projects on GitHub, put GitHub on your resume, but detail those projects as well. I've got like some sample resume, or like a resume sample that you can look at as well. I don't know if the voice chat's going to pick up. There it is. And so you can go see that link over in chat. And it's basically a Google Doc that you can look at, where it's got some sample bits of what you can put on a resume, and how I like to talk about projects and things like that, where you have like a user empathy statement about, like, I built this project for users to blah, blah, blah. Or you can just say users can blah, blah, blah. And I think that makes a really impactful sort of thing to put on a resume, where, again, you're demonstrating the skill. You put a link to the GitHub repo over there, even if it's not a lot of code. It doesn't have to be a lot of code, but you're at least showing people, like, this is what I've built, this is why I built it. And again, having the README file on GitHub is really impactful for people to see it. Even if they can't directly interact with your Raspberry Pi to go experience what you built, that's okay. You can still put the code up there and still let people see what you built and why you built it. That's the most important part of this, is understanding what you built and why. Freckled Science says, I'm starting in an entrepreneur technology course where I have to build a startup. Ooh, we have the whole month of November to build our team for next term. So you've got like a week left to build our team. It's supposed to be a team of 2 PhD scientists, 3 MBA students. There are 100 students. I don't understand how to build a team or how to read resumes or LinkedIn's. I feel like half of what people say is overselling. This is true. How it works is we meet students for coffee and then we judge them. Yes, judging is the best part of interviewing. So far, I don't trust the MBA student knowledge. How do I read them? Ooh, this is great. So if I can distill this a little bit. So Amanda's currently getting a PhD, I believe, right, in chemistry. But Amanda, feel free to correct me on that. So you have to build a startup. So I imagine you've got some kind of idea, you've put that idea out, and now, like, people are applying to sort of be part of your startup project. And it's a combination of master's degrees, as well as, like, maybe the lower level people that are going to actually do the work. A lot of MBA students are science and engineering undergrad backgrounds. Okay. So I think understanding what it is you want to build, like, do you want to do like the bio 3D printing kind of stuff, and what would their expertise be? I think having a good interview process is important, but knowing what you need to get out of that interview process is really what you need to get at here. Like, what's your goal? Like, as the startup sort of founder, your goal is to present the vision and let them tell you how they're going to execute on that vision. I think Steve Jobs actually had a quote about this. Ryan, I don't know if you've heard this or not. Steve Jobs had a thing of, like, we don't want to hire people and tell them what to do. We want to hire the people that tell us what to do. Like, I want to hire people that are going to inform me on, like, how to build a thing. Have you heard that, Ryan?
Yeah. Ensuring that, like, folks that you're, there was an interesting rule at Twilio that, like, you basically had to hire someone who essentially was, like, better than you at something. It didn't have to be your core competency, right? But the idea is that you wanted to always be, like, have an additive nature when you're hiring someone. And like we were talking about earlier, I think sometimes that could be like, they can write C++ better than anyone else, right? But you could also have someone who just, like, asks better questions, right? Has, like, a different perspective on the problem that you're facing, right? Or has domain expertise, but maybe not technical expertise. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can be that better, right? It doesn't always have to just be like one measure.
Yeah, I agree. So Amanda says like feeling very overwhelmed with the number of people applying and so on. I would say having some kind of screener, I think would be important. Like have just build like a Google Form survey and say fill out these questions. Tell me like why you think you're a good fit for this, or what are you going to bring to the team? Like how are you going to help accomplish this goal? Like give me 2 sentences or write me a paragraph on like what you think about this aspect of the project. And then I think that that's going to help you get through a lot of that because you'll just be able to kind of skim through that a little bit and then figure out who you want to call. But understanding like how you've presented the idea of the project, but also how they intend to contribute. Because like you say, like a lot of them are like, I can do all the things, I can do anything you want, just pick me, pick me. But at the end of the day, they need to be able to describe how they're going to contribute. How are they going to make that impact? It can't just be like, yes, I will come and contribute and I will solve all the things. It's like, how? And so I would say maybe start with like just a Google Form survey where all the people that are applying, you just send them all the survey and say, go fill this thing out and go put half a dozen questions on there. Like reword the project idea back to me. Like, what do you think this project is really all about? Because that'll help you sort of align what your goal is and what they think the goal is. And then you can screen people out that way. And then you can ask questions like, what skills, like what specific skills do you bring to the team? Not I can go do anything, but like what specifically are you going to help me with on this project? How are you specifically going to contribute on this project? Don't wait for me to tell you how to do it. I want you to tell me how you are going to implement certain things. Have them write out a couple of sentences from there. And if it's very vague, if they're like, I can do all the programming, it's like, well, that's not specific enough. Tell me how you're going to program that thing. Or I can go do this, all these chemical things. It's like, but what specifically are you going to do? Like ask for specifics. And now you can start to weed out all the people that give you very vague answers. And you can start to hone in. So of, maybe 100 people applying, you want to ideally narrow that down to like 10 people. But depending on how many people you need to sort of hire, I would say you want to interview probably 2 or 3 people for each kind of role that you need to fill. And then you get to choose like one of those or 2 of those, depending on their qualifications and so on. But you want to get into the specifics of like, how are you going to help me execute on this vision? Because your job isn't to tell them how. Your job is to tell them the vision and let them tell you the how. And maybe from your perspective and your education and background, you do need to tell them how because you're bringing that level of direction to what it is you're going to be building out as an entire sort of startup. But that's how I would start to narrow those folks down.
To double click on that notion of domain expertise for freckled science, I think the idea is like, hey, I'm an impeccable programmer or an impeccable marketer, but if I also understand what problem you're trying to solve with this startup, like let's say it's some agricultural centric startup, right? If I've like been a farmer, if my parents are farmers, if I've like spent time studying agriculture, right? That person with that information and like the skills that you need is going to be that much more compelling to you, at least in my opinion. So
yeah. And Amanda, I agree with what RC Maniac said in chat too. Like it's fine to just kind of say like, oh, your first impression is too generic, it's not specific enough, and just move on. Like when I as a hiring manager, when I look at resumes, I'm looking for a reason to say no because I have so many to go through. And so if you're not specific enough, if you don't provide enough context on the value you bring, you're an immediate no. If I've got to hunt for information on that resume or on that LinkedIn to try to figure out like how are you going to contribute to the team, you're an automatic no. If you make it very clear like this is how I'm going to contribute or this is the value that I bring, you're going to make it onto my maybe list. And now I'm going to go through that maybe list. I'm going to like weed out a little bit more and look for more and more specific like how are you going to contribute to this thing. And so having like an initial screener. So I would say, yes, first wave, like go through and trim out all the people that are very clearly like, I can do all the things. It's like, no, you can't. You're a no. And start to hone in on those. And then that first batch where you think like, maybe I could talk to this person, send them that screener survey and have them fill out a little bit more information. Like, tell me more specifics about how you plan to contribute to this or where you want to contribute to this. And then you can kind of figure out, okay, well, I need someone that knows how to do this and I need someone that knows how to do this and this. And so based on the responses, like who do I have in this bucket? Who do I have in this bucket? Oh gosh, I don't have anybody in this bucket. So maybe I need to like change some screening questions, or maybe as I'm interviewing these other buckets of people, like find out like, do you happen to have this specific skill? Because I also need people who can do that. But find out like what is your specific experience in that, not just do you think you can do that, but also tell me how you have done that in the past, because you want to make sure that they have actual hands-on contribution experience for those kinds of things. That's going to help you again kind of weed people out at a high level. And so there's no getting around having to interview people, but I think the more you can do to kind of screen them out, the better off you're going to be. So when I think about things as a hiring manager, when I'm looking at resumes, I'm looking for a reason to say no. But if I get on a phone call with you, I'm looking for a reason to say yes, because I've looked through your credentials, I've looked through your background, I've looked through your screen. I think you could maybe do the job. And so I'm looking for you. I'm looking for a way for you to convince me that yes, you're someone that I should bring on the team. As opposed to like, no, you're too vague. Like I couldn't get enough specific information, and that happens in real interviews too. Even when we're actually talking on a real interview, sometimes I could be like, hey Ryan, tell me this thing, and Ryan's like all high level, super high level, but doesn't go into a lot of fine grained detail. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to hire you because you haven't shown me how specifically you are going to contribute to the team. Amanda says, I already met like 20 people. I swear I would only work with 3 of them. I mean, that's a gut check too. Is do you want to work with that person? I mean, you're going to be doing this for months. So yeah, it has to be people that you are going to get along with. This is part of why companies also do culture fit interviews as well, around like, do I even want to work with somebody like Ryan? You know, is Ryan pleasant enough? Are we going to get along okay? Like, we don't have to agree on everything. You don't want to hire people who are, you know, what we call yes men, and they're only agreeable with you. Like, you have to have some amount of checks and balances, and not that they're argumentative, but that they've got a different perspective than what you have, because those are the people that you want on the team. You want to have people coming from different perspectives and walks of life to have that diversity on the team. You know me, I love diversity. Amanda knows that about me, and the time that I've spent on my stream, and the fundraising that we do. Like, I care a lot about perspectives and so on. And that's also important as well. Like what sort of background and perspective are they bringing to the team, to make sure that everybody's not 100% in agreement with you, but where they don't agree with you, like challenge them on that in a healthy way. Challenge them on that and say, oh, tell me a little bit more about why you think that perspective is helpful or beneficial to the team. And you can start to drill in on like, oh, I never would have thought of that. Maybe that is somebody that I need to bring on the team. And so it's good to have people that, yes, you know, you can work professionally well with, but also people that are going to challenge your ideas, because they're going to have questions and they're going to push on things too. But you don't want them to push so much that now they're leading things. You're the visionary. You need to be in control of that narrative. So you need to bring people on that are willing to execute your vision, but also do it from their own perspectives. And like Ryan and I were talking about at the very beginning of the session is, we were talking about like agile process and so on, and how at a high level they can say what you want to have happen, and then as you get down into the people that actually do the work, let them determine the how, you determine the what. But like I said, from your background and your experience, because you've got way more experience than these people, you might need to trickle down a little bit of the how to do things, especially if you're bringing on undergrads, where you need to specifically work with them and say, okay, this is how we're going to do this specific part. So go research that, or let me, you know, show you how I would do this part of the project, and now you can go do that too. So there might be some education in there as well, but that's going to help develop them. So that's how I would kind of approach that. So.
Yeah, I've got to drop here in the next couple of minutes, but I did want
Okay, cool.
to call out one thing that for something early like this, where you have an idea and you're trying to essentially get like product market fit and trying to understand if the problem that you're presenting is helpful and useful to the group. Something like lean, like LEAN, lean startup could be really interesting for you to check out. And the idea of that is it's agile like, except it's more focused on like product market fit and iterating rapidly to try and understand if the ideas that you have and your team is working on are really going to resonate and land in the market. So yeah, check out lean. Yeah, cool. So yeah, lean is the thing for sure. And I think that learning that and understanding the tenets of that is really helpful almost in any kind of problem solving situation. just biting off small pieces, learning more, and then pivoting and changing like as you learn.
having
So
having that iterative feedback loop is really important too.
exactly,
Like what have we
exactly.
learned over the last week or two? How can we try tweaking something, and does that make it better? Does it make it worse? Let's try changing this next time. Does that make that better or worse? Okay, well, let's keep doing that, but now let's change this part, and it's this whole iterative improvement thing that you want to do. So yeah, Ryan, really appreciate your perspectives today. I know you need to drop, but thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
I was stoked to
Really
be here.
appreciate, yeah, really appreciate hearing your background, and it's always cool to catch up with folks that I've worked with in the past and having you on the stream too. Thanks for telling us about all that. Before you leave, though, you have to tell us what your favorite book on that bookshelf is behind you. Um,
Oh man, I would say professionally, my favorite book is probably the Accelerate book, which is what a lot of the Dora reports are based on.
okay,
And then personally, oh man, this is a tricky one because a lot of the books that I like are now on Kindle. But I think Exhalation by Ted Chiang is the last book that someone gave me that I read that was a physical book, and that was a really good
okay.
one if you like sci-fi short stories.
Cool. Awesome. I would say from a sci-fi point of view, I think Ender's Game is still probably my top sci-fi pick. Followed closely by Ready Player One. Those were both really good, like fiction
Nice.
science based and space themed and stuff like that. But yeah, good times. Don't see the movie though. The movie was garbage. But I mean, in both cases, Ender's Game and Ready Player One. I mean, the movies were okay for what they were, but the books are much better for sure. Um, yeah, awesome. Thanks again, Ryan. Yeah, Ryan, I'll follow up with you this week. I'd love to stay in touch, and we need to chat about having you on the Postman podcast at some point too, and talk a little bit more about fire hydrant and incident response and so on.
Yeah,
Um,
that'd be a hoot. Thanks
yeah,
again.
awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
See
I'll
ya.
let you drop off, and I'm going to switch over to this view over here. All right. Well, big thanks to Ryan for hanging out. It's always good to catch up with folks. So yeah, Amanda, I'm happy to like keep chatting a little bit about like what an interview process could look like. But I think the first thing that you need to do is like figure out how do you screen out all of the people that are applying, because you're going to have way more people applying than you need to actually fill. And so don't worry about hijacking the questions. That's exactly why I'm here. I would say figure out how to screen out people at an initial phase of like I'm not getting enough sort of signal, as we call it. I'm not getting enough signal from these people. And then from there, do some sort of screening, and it can just be virtual. Make a Google form, send them that Google form, and then hopefully they're giving you enough information on that to then screen out even more people. Ideally, you want to get down to only interviewing a couple of people and say, I think you can do the job. I'm going to interview you and hope that you convince me that yes, you can do the job. But yeah, again, people that you're going to appreciate working with and that you're also going to learn from, but people that professionally you're going to get along with because you're going to be working with them for months and months. But also like keep other people that applied, keep them kind of in your back pocket to some degree. Where if somebody doesn't work out on the team, you've got other people you can fall back on. Say like, hey, I'm opening up this position again. Are you still interested in coming and working on the project? Because we've got some extra people hanging out. William Singh, thanks for dropping by. Thanks for the follow. Free Heathen, good to see you as well. Thanks for dropping by. Free Heathen is another live streamer here on Twitch and does a lot of 3D printed like toy design. Makes some really interesting 3D printed designs. Free Heathen, since you're here, I'm going to totally take a tangent here for a second and talk about 3D printing. This is my latest 3D print. It's all finished and it's enormous. So I actually need to back up to show this. But if there are any Spider-Man fans out there, I 3D printed a giant Spider Gwen. This thing is about 2 feet tall, and it's all 100% Polymaker filament. But Spider Gwen from Into the Spider Verse, it's got a really cool base, and then also building a giant Superman as well. So I still have obviously a few details to work on that, and put the cape together. Got some Bondo on there that I'm sanding off, and then I just kind of clips on there like that. And so it's this going to be this really enormous statue as well. So that's the fun stuff I've been doing on my side of it. And then the kids have a winter festival coming up at their school where we sell 3D printed things and do like little games with like the 3D catapults and stuff like that. So I've been furiously emailing makers and saying like, hey, can we give away your design as part of this fundraiser effort at the school? And every single one of them have come back and said like, yeah, you can absolutely like give away these things, or sell them for like 25 cents or 50 cents or whatever. Like they're totally cool with my kids selling stuff online. So it's been really great. Scrollmaster asked, is it painted or is it multicolor? It's actually a multicolor print. I did go back and I did put a coat of paint on it just to get a little bit of shine on there. But this is all like, this is the magenta and like an aqua blue filament here, and like a wood color filament on the drumsticks, and then just black and white obviously on that. The base is a Polyterra charcoal black, and then I did kind of a transparent PLA for the webs. The Superman one is all like multicolored print as well. So Daddy Wisey, good to see you. Thanks for coming by. No more giveaways. Giveaways are all done, but appreciate that. Must have a really nice printer. I've got 2 of the Bamboo Lab X1Cs with the AMS. One of them's broken. I'm waiting for a new piece to show up to fix it. Show the poop. Yeah, let me show you the poop for the Spider-Gwen. This box is full of poop from Spider-Gwen. I got much better at it with Superman. Superman is only this much poop so far. Much smaller box. But there's no getting around the poop with the bamboo. But yeah, the amount of just filament transitions, because the Spider-Gwen was about 6,000 filament transitions, printing all the different parts. And just with the level of detail, there's a lot of filament color swapping going on. So it's about 6,000, little blobs of filament change. And so I've actually ordered some things now where we're going to try to melt that PLA down and pour it into some silicone molds and make little keychains out of it. And that's part of the giveaway that we want to do at the school. All kinds of fun stuff there. So sorry for the tangent. So yeah, Amanda, hopefully that was helpful from an interviewing point of view. But yeah, feel free to send me some questions on Discord or wherever if you want to chat some more. Be happy to help you out with coming up with questions and things like that to screen people out. That'll be easy with the bamboo. Bamboo is a great word for it. Bamboo. I'm going to call it that from now on. I have an Ender 3. It's not extruding filament right now. Yeah, Twisted. There are a lot of things that can cause that to happen. But usually it's not too bad to fix. There are a couple of things that you can do. One's called a cold pull, where you heat things up and you put a piece of filament in by hand and you let it cool down to about 90 degrees and then you yank the filament back out of it. That can be one way to like pull out a clog. You can also get acupuncture needles that you kind of poke up underneath into the nozzle. And that can help clear things out too. But I would probably look at a cold pull. I think that'll probably help you out the most. Never cold pull. I mean, I do cold pulls all the time. I think that it's a good way of doing it. I mean, if you've got the money, you can just take the nozzle out and replace the nozzle. Nozzles are pretty cheap, but yeah, free heathen. Feel free to drop perspective in. It's bad for the machine. Is it? I mean, I've been doing them on Prusa's for years, and I've never had negative effects of doing cold pulls. If it's bad specifically for the enders, then yeah, feel free to drop some info in there. But I mean, I've done them on Prusa's. I've done them on I had a CR10, I had a CR6, and I would do cold pulls on those. But if you've got perspective on it, absolutely, I'm always down here. Always add perspectives in chat. I'm totally cool with that. I have a new nozzle that came with it. I can't get the original one off. So you have to heat it up. You can't just untwist the thing while it's cold. You have to heat it up and then use a special socket thing to pull it off and put the new one on. You have to do it while it's hot. Yeah, you have to heat it up to remove it. And they usually recommend set it as whatever temperature you would normally print at, and then raise it up from there. I think the ender will go up to 250 degrees, so I would probably heat it up to 245 and take the old nozzle off, put the new one on. And then you don't want to really crank it on there. It needs to be a little bit more than finger tight. But obviously you're not going to do it with your fingers because it'll be 240 degrees Celsius. But you want to use a socket or something, put it in there to where it just feels snug, and then like maybe like an extra little quarter turn from that. You don't want to like really crank it on there because you can actually break things doing that. And then yeah, you want to like re-level your bed and all that, like because every nozzle is going to have like slight variations, and so putting a new nozzle in, it's not going to print perfectly if you have to level your own bed and things like that. So you have to go through the whole bed leveling thing after that. Metal expands and shrinks. Yeah, exactly. So you have to do it. You have to do it when it's hot. But yeah, go follow Free Heathen, RC Maniac. They've all got like way more 3D printing experience than I do. So yeah, definitely drop in on Free Heathen's chat and chat with them about 3D printing stuff. They do way more than I do. But yeah, we've been going for about 2.5 hours, so I think I might wrap up myself here. We had Ryan come by and drop off. Really appreciate Ryan's perspectives on things. But yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap up too, and I gotta finish up some stuff for the week. And then it's our holiday week here in America. We got Thanksgiving on Thursday, so I won't be streaming Thursday. I'll be back next Sunday. I'll probably do some more resume reviews. So if you want a resume review, feel free to drop it over at this link. You can send it over, and I think I've had like 1 or 2 come in since we did the last one. And so feel free to drop a resume over, and we'll do those next Sunday. And then I'll be back on the Sunday Thursday thing starting next week. And then depending on like Christmas holidays and things like that, I may drop a few more streams in December, but I'll probably be streaming most of the time in December. If you're looking for a job in the new year, because a lot of people are like, oh, new year, new job. Now is the time to start networking. Networking is going to get you a job way faster. And so if you go check me out on Twitter, I just dropped a big Twitter thread on like how to network and what kinds of questions to ask and things like that. So you can go follow me on Twitter and go see that thread. It was just like a day or two ago. But go check that out on Twitter. I'm probably going to drop a new thread on like resume tips as well. So I appreciate any visibility and retweets and stuff on those kinds of things. But go check those out as far as advice and things go, because networking now is going to get you a job later. And so the sooner you can start networking with companies and get to know them and let them get to know you and talk about your projects and things like that, the more you're going to be in sort of present frame of mind for people that are going to be hiring, whether it's for an internship level role or a new full-time role. It's going to be really important that you network as much as possible and get to know people and start talking about your projects and things like that. And as Ryan and I were talking about, like get feedback on practicing behavioral questions. Like talk to those folks and be like, hey, if you got a minute, like, can you go check out this Loom recording that I made of how I answered this behavioral question? Can you tell me if there's a better way that I could do it? I think that would be a great thing to practice as well. Amanda's asking, is LinkedIn really worth having? For some professions more than others, yes. You hate it, that's okay. It's okay to hate it. It's really useful for the tech industry, for recruiters, because recruiters like to hang out there. So if you're looking for people to do programming and so on, it's a necessary evil. But it's okay to hate it. It's totally okay to hate it. But I think, oh, you need it for your tech course, and it's the necessary evil. Then you're gonna have to put up with it. But Amanda, send me a message on Discord. I'm happy to chat with you kind of offline as well, and we can chat a little bit more. Maybe we can hop on a Zoom call or something and talk about like how to set up your LinkedIn profile and things like that, and the kinds of things that you're going to need. I'd be totally cool with that. And then yeah, we can definitely chat some more about like screening questions and things like that. Amanda, if you want help, I'm totally happy to help you out with that kind of stuff. Mark H says LinkedIn is awesome. Best job postings today. I found my new job through LinkedIn. Yeah, I've applied to things through LinkedIn though. They're quick apply and easy apply. Doesn't always work. And sometimes it's easy to get lost in network connections and like by getting ghosted, where you like send messages to people and they just never respond. You have to remember too, not everybody just lives on LinkedIn all day, every day. But if it's something that you need to do and you know that they're going to be on LinkedIn, then LinkedIn is worth investing a little bit of time and get some basic information up there. Talk about yourself, talk about the type of role you want to have and the background and why why you care about a particular aspect of an industry, how you bring value to a company. Those are the kinds of things that are going to win recruiters over and really get them to notice you. So you get a lot of spam to buy things. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, the best you can do is like mark that as like spam. But most honestly, I would say 95% of the things that I report to LinkedIn, they come back and they're like, yeah, that doesn't violate our terms of use, which is really annoying. Yeah, for me, it's more like buying a service of like, oh, you should come like pay for our platform or subscribe to this newsletter. It's like, I don't need to see all that. It's not very helpful. Um, but every company's a little bit different with how and why they want to handle things the way they do. Um, but yeah, it's annoying whenever you get spam on any platform. It's annoying. All right, well let's wind down. Let's find somebody to raid. Mine Wolf came online. We've raided into Claire's channel a couple of times in the past. Kind of want to find somebody new to go raid that we haven't raided into before. If anybody has suggestions on anybody doing some software development, feel free to start dropping those in chat. Take this survey for an Amazon gift card. Yeah, I've seen those for sure. Free Heathen says, "Can I get a hand again?" Yep. Yeah, Free Heathen. Feel free to drop me a message on Discord or on Twitch, and yeah, we can hop on a call. Is Science actually streaming right now? I don't think I saw them streaming, but if they are, we can definitely go right into them. I don't stream starting soon. They literally just started streaming, so yeah, we'll wait a minute for him to start his stream, and then we'll maybe stream over there, or we'll raid over there. He's on a timer. Oh, 6 minutes left. I mean, we can chat for another 6 minutes. Unless anybody else has anybody else that they would like to go that they think would be helpful. I usually like to rate into people that are doing programming of some kind or learning how to do a thing where we can go in and we can support them for a little bit. I was looking at some Python programmers or people like doing some leak code. Who was the other one that I was looking at earlier? It was someone else that I was looking at that I think they just rated out actually. I do have one raid target in mind, but yeah, Mine Wolf. Yeah, Claire has a really good stream. Really, really helpful. Goes through and like talks about project work and talks about interviewing. She was part of 100 devs, and so a lot of the automated things that you'll see show up in chat talk about like, hey, go follow these people that are part of 100 devs, and I've got Claire on that regular rotation as well. Claire also won one of our giveaways in the past, so sent Claire one of the little catapult things, one of the little catapult toys. I do have one raid target in mind. They actually help people understand like why leak code problems work the way they do. They are a previous Google employee. I'll drop their name in chat. I don't know if we're actually going to go raid them or not, but Kiki Impact, they actually do a really good job describing why leak code problems work the way they do and why algorithms work the way they do. They've had some really good streams in the past. I don't know if I think it's been a while since we raided into their channel. Like it's been quite a while, but they actually do a really good job with explanations and helping people out. And they do it by actually like working on the problem themselves and then explaining why things are. And they do a lot of diagramming and stuff like that. So I think we'll raid over to them. Yeah, I think we'll raid over there, and we'll say hi over there. They've only got a couple of dozen people viewing their stream, but it's more than I got right now. So we'll go raid over there. Saw this post on 3D Printing Stack Exchange. Started a print on my Ender 3, went to work. I came back. The nozzle was on the floor, covered in plastic. 2 wheels were missing. Glass bed was behind the table. What the heck? Oh my gosh. Yeah, yikes. That's bizarre. Yeah. RC, this was the last hot end that I changed off of my Prusa the other day. It got it got pretty gnarly for sure, but this is the hot end that I just replaced. It was like it was leaking out of here basically, and so it just had like filament just oozing out everywhere on this thing. So I just swapped out the whole hot end. I wasn't even going to try and diagnose it. So good times. All right, well let's go right over to Kiki Impact. Be supportive over there. This person really likes to help people out. So we'll catch everybody over there, and I'll see you all next Sunday. If you're in the States, have a great holiday week. And Amanda, message me on Discord. We'll chat some more. And same with Free Heathen. Send me a message as well, and we'll find a time to chat this week. Have a good day, everybody. I don't have a raid command, so just feel free to make some noise when you're over there. I have no raid command. Yep, this is true. All right, folks, we'll see you over there. Cheers.